Good evening all and welcome, and thank you all so much for being here. It means a lot that you choose to watch this channel. I have a chilling collection of scary stories in the rain for you to enjoy, but for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I've been noticing some weird stuff happen in our basement recently. It seems to have taken off when our son was born. For context, both my husband's dad and my dad sadly passed away very suddenly at relatively young ages before our son was born. I've had experiences in our house before that makes me sometimes wonder if one or both of them come to visit on occasion. The first two stories I'd like to share with you are as follows. This first one happened a year ago. I was closing everything up to go to bed. I thought I heard a weird sound coming from the basement. It was my son's creepy toy cell phone, just blaring away by itself downstairs. The kind of toy where you physically need to press a button to get it to make a sound. Needless to say, no one was downstairs. When I went down to investigate, it was literally just lying face side up in the middle of the floor. So not like something had fallen on a button or anything. I instantly got the chills like crazy and noped back upstairs pretty quickly. Then about a week or so ago, I was downstairs changing the cat's litter box. Her litter box is in a utility room off the basement hall. To the right is our guest room, and to the left is our son's playroom. When I went downstairs, I noticed that my son's toy robot was sitting in the middle of the guest room. I distinctly remember thinking that it was a weird place for it to be, but shrugging it off, thinking that maybe my son had moved it last time we were down there together. I went and changed the litter, and when I came back out, the robot was sitting in the middle of the playroom again. It had jumped across the entire basement. No one else was downstairs with me, and while the robot can move by itself, it was definitely off, as it's super loud and obnoxious and there's no mistaking it. Then today, as it's Christmas, we got our son a wagon. My husband wrapped it up the other day and blew up a big red balloon that he tied to the wagon, as our son is obsessed with balloons. We left it downstairs in the basement for now, because it's huge and we wanted it to be a surprise. I was running out to the store quickly, and my husband and son were home alone. Suddenly from the basement, he hears a loud pop. He thought it was the cat, just up to no good, but she was upstairs in the kitchen with him. He went downstairs to check it out, and the balloon had popped by itself. It was in the middle of the room with nothing around it that was sharp, and not under any vent or anything. He just said the basement felt super off, and he got pretty creeped out. So, it seems like the creepy incidences are happening in the basement and more frequently. I'd also like to point out that my son has seen my late father-in-law. It happened both in the creepy basement as well as other places around the house. The other day we were eating lunch in the kitchen, and my son was pointing out the various pieces of his art that we've put up on the fridge. He points at one particular piece and says, "I made that one for Grandpa." If you recall, both his grandpas passed before he was born. I asked him which one he meant, and he said the grandpa who visits him at night. Back in 2004, I worked for a popular Canadian company that sold cell phones / cables / internet and stuff. I worked at a location in the city's local mall for a few years, and over the course of time I got to know and build rapport with the customers that I saw regularly. There was one customer in particular that I served at least once a month. He would buy a prepaid phone with cash every month without fail. As I rang him up the second or third time, I watched him open up his wallet and saw half-inch thick wads of $100 bills. Then it clicked. Monthly burner phones, wads of hundos. He was a dealer, for sure. Now the guy was genuinely a nice dude, always polite, knew me by name, asked how my day was, and I enjoyed seeing him come in. I could tell you countless horror stories of the physical and verbal abuse that we endured at the hands of customers at that location, so it was really great to get to deal with a nice person. And the commission and bump in personal sales was always nice as well. One night, I was at home making dinner. I had the TV on in the background. My program had ended, and the station switched to the 6 o'clock news. As I sat down in front of the TV with my food, the news station opened with a story on a murder that had happened in the city. Suddenly, my favorite customer's mugshot popped up, and I sat there mouth agape, listening to the details of the story. It blew my mind knowing that I had interacted with him every month for probably a solid year. He's actually out of jail now, got an early release and everything, and while I'm sure I'm not really at risk, I'd rather not meet him again. This happened last year at the university I currently attend. I met 3 friends, Sarah, Jill and Mike. Sarah and I met back in high school, who I ran into at college. We ended up rekindling our friendship. She told me a secret that she kept in high school, that she was a lesbian and was out, and introduced me to her girlfriend Jill and their friend Mike. When we all ate in the school's dining hall, the 4 of us kind of became pretty close and ended up meeting and hanging out as a group frequently. Even though there was a little drama between Mike and Sarah, because both have a thing for Jill and would occasionally get jealous or try to impress her. Mike brought up to me that him and Jill actually had a cuddle session in her dorm room, which Sarah didn't know about at the time. I have to admit, I also had a thing for Jill. She had a nice smile, pink hair, and a sweet, positive, Johnny personality that attracted a lot of people. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, myself, Mike, Sarah and Jill made it a habit to have a weekly hangout, late at night. I was the only one with a vehicle, so we would go riding around in my truck. We'd leave around 8 PM and would not be back until 3 AM. We'd drive around town, just riding or walking to the downtown area and occasionally to stop and grab snacks, or at a local store that was open. Or even at a friend's house where Sarah and Jill could get high for the night. One night around 2 AM we passed a local park that's pretty popular, and Jill playfully yelled for us to go to the park. I was a little skeptical about the idea at first, but the majority overruled as everyone seemed excited about the idea. When we pulled up at the park, it was pretty spooky. It was dark and didn't seem like the great place to be at this time of night. Jill was the first person to jump out of the truck along with Sarah and me. Mike was not far behind. Me and Sarah headed over to the swings while Mike and Jill ran around and played on the playground equipment like 5-year-old kids. Near the park was a large sitting area, and in the distance I could see 2 dark figures, and I pointed them out to Sarah. We assumed they were homeless people because the park is normally infested with them. They kept watching us over the fence behind the woods, and I could hear someone walking through. This was getting creepy, and Sarah also felt the same way, and we yelled at Jill and Mike, who were having a great time on the slide, that we were leaving. We left, and apparently those 10 minutes were so good that the majority insisted we come back the next day. The next night comes around, and we do our usual routine. It's 2:30 AM and we're at the park again. This time, there are more homeless people coming out of the woods who look pretty creepy. Jill again was the first to jump out of the truck and say, "Are you coming, kids? We're gonna have a fun day again," in her excited voice. So we go to the play area, and apparently what we didn't notice is that we were trespassing as the park opening hours were over. But the gate was still open, so we proceeded anyway. Me and Sarah were again on the swings watching our backs and looking for any suspicious activity, while Mike and Jill were playing on the monkey bars. 10 minutes later, a grey car pulls up at the end of the fence and just sat there. Me and Sarah looked at each other, and we watched it for about half a minute. The lights in the car came on for a quick second, and we could see there were 3 men in there, but we couldn't get a good look. They sat there, then slowly drove around to the entrance of the gate. Jill and Mike both looked at me, and Sarah was worried. This seemed highly suspicious because no one would be at this park at this time of night unless they were homeless and looking for a place to sleep or do something else. As the car got closer, I demanded everyone to head to the truck. The 4 of us all ran, and the faster we ran, the faster the car drove to the entrance of the gate. We jumped into my truck and drove away, and we could see the car following us for a certain distance, and then we lost it. We were all pretty creeped out and shaken up, and we still avoid that park to this day. I told another friend about this incident, and he wasn't very surprised. He said that the neighborhood and area that surrounds the park are known to have a high crime rate, especially that late at night. I told this to Sarah, Jill and Mike, and to this day we always ask the question, what would have happened if we'd have stayed or got caught? So to the individuals in the grey car, let's not meet again. We have lived in this house for almost 8 years now, and there are lots of things to share. Our neighborhood sits on the original town cemetery from the 1800s. In the 70s, when they built the neighborhood, they only removed the graves they needed to put in the foundation and the sewage system. We didn't know this until we had been living here for 3 to 4 years. But when we found out, it certainly explained a lot. While we were still in the process of moving in and hadn't even spent the first night in the house, I heard 2 little kids talking. I heard it clear as day. A girl probably of around 10 or 12 and a little boy who sounded no older than 5. I only have 2 brothers, both younger than me but still older than either of those kids. It sounded like any younger siblings playing, and because it sounded so normal, I can't remember exactly what was said. Obviously, the first thing I did was call out to them, and then the playing stopped. I never heard them leave. I searched the house and no one was inside. Everyone was in the backyard putting together our swing set. I told my mum what I heard, and she of course didn't believe me. I dropped it and we moved on. Months later in my room, I'm trying to sleep, when I roll over and see the reflection of a girl in my TV screen. I realized I was seeing her back, long curly blonde hair, and a blue dress that appeared to be from the 1800s. Somehow in my sleep-deprived brain I thought it was my own life-sized doll and ignored it and went back to sleep. It definitely wasn't. It was the wrong color and the doll was facing the TV, so there's no way it was her. I didn't tell my mum this time round because she didn't believe me the last time. After that, stuff started moving around. Things fall off the stairs that are carpet. And the lights around the house turn on and off at random. I hear people walking around the house all the time. And still my mother does not believe me. Which is really stupid because she believes in ghosts. I affectionately named the ghost girl Lizzie because it just felt right. Finally one day I'm out with my friends doing teenage stuff. It's roughly 11 PM at night, and all of a sudden, my mum calls me. Tell Lizzie not to scare the crap out of me. Turns out, she'd gotten up to use the bathroom, and when she returned to go back to bed, she'd seen a dark orb hovering over her side of the bed. When she saw it, it quickly exited via the ceiling, and then she called me. Not long after that, we found the local news articles about our neighborhood and the cemetery. We also found out that during a flood one year, one particular casket kept popping back up and it had to be moved, and that a lot of the neighborhood still have headstones visible in their yard. We're horrified because we definitely noticed some weirdly flat stones out near our garden, and one only 5 or 6 feet from fruit trees that we planted. So now we all accept that we live with a ghost or two. Weird stuff happens all the time. They stop throwing stuff off the stairs, but they now show up in our Xbox Connect, turn sinks on, and occasionally knock stuff over. but I also sometimes will hear them talking faintly. I haven't seen either of them since the first time, but I know they're still about. We treat them like family, talk to them, offer them snacks, leave toys out to play with. Life is weird, and new people in the house never take long to notice. Lately, I've also been seeing a shadow cat hanging around. We have 2 cats already, but neither of them can disappear through walls, so there's that. Another story I have to share is one day my friends and I were leaving the house. I don't remember where we were going, and my mum comes around the corner swearing she saw someone walking down the hallway. We were all in the living room and my brothers weren't home. At the time we had our Xbox set up on a dresser with its own TV so the kids could play games without taking over the living room, and said dresser was right next to the doorway that leads into the hall. My mum says she thinks she heard the Xbox turn on, and comments on how easy it would be probably for the ghost to turn it on since the button is so sensitive. We all have a chuckle at the ghosts playing video games and continue to the door. Not 10 minutes later, my mum calls me to tell me that the Xbox had in fact been turning on and off repeatedly, that she was trying to watch TV and it started to freak her out. I laugh because of course Lizzie would do that. You just told her how it works, I say, and I hear my mum politely ask her to stop because it's distracting, and the beeping from the console stops for maybe a minute or 2 before it starts again. My mum makes me come back early, supposedly because Lizzie likes me, and she'll stop if I ask her. The Xbox continued to turn on and off at random, albeit every once in a while now for the next few weeks. Now when our consoles or even the TV turn on by itself, we'll ask her what she wants to watch and play, but never get an answer. About 6 years ago, I was dating a girl who was extremely spiritual. It completely opened my eyes to different aspects of life and death. I always left my cell phone next to the bed, in case anyone ever needed me in the middle of the night. No one ever called me past 2 a.m. unless something bad happened. Now I have bad sleep insomnia, sometimes worse than others, but this night I was able to fall asleep at a normal time, roughly 10 p.m, and my significant other was already fast asleep. I had woken up at 3 a.m. on the dot to my cell phone ringing. In a daze of sleep, I quickly pick up the phone, not looking at the number, and I hear an echoing voice that sounded underwater repeating, "Please help me. Get my father, please." Creepy as that is, here's the kicker. It was my significant other's voice on the phone. Now, that caught my attention and woke me right up. I'm in bed, looking down at her and hearing this thing. "Please get my father, I need help." Take a step back. Hearing this thing on the phone made my stomach drop. It's like I knew she was passing away. It completely freaked me out. I moved my leg and realized that there's a body next to me, and obviously it's her, and I start violently shaking her, asking if she's here next to me. The person or this thing on the phone is still begging me for help, and I'm shaking my significant other, the one who's right next to me. The plea for help for her father, once again, is drowned by the water sound and the echoed voice. At this point, her eyes open wide, and she realizes it's her own voice, and we both look at the number. It's just a bunch of ones. And I say her name over the phone asking, "How can I help?" And we both watch whatever it is hang up the phone and disconnect. The number was untraceable by the phone company and didn't even show up in the records of my cell. This is one of the creepiest things that's happened in my life. I'm looking up similar things I can find, but she was very much alive and next to me. Could this have been a call from another dimension? We, to this day, have zero explanation, and I can never shake the feeling that she was leaving this world from the other side of the phone, passing on, begging me for help. This happened to me when I was in college. and is probably one of the creepiest and weirdest things to ever happen to me. I believe in ghosts. I've had countless experiences in my life that have made it almost impossible for me not to, and this still gives me chills whenever I think about it. I was a freshman in college and was heavily involved in the arts, theatre and music specifically. The fine arts building of my college had quite a bit of history. It was built in 1916 and had previously been one of the largest Masonic temples in the city. This is fairly evident by the Masonic symbols adorning the building and covered the stained glass windows. I'd heard rumors of secret passageways under the building that ran all the way into downtown, but I will say I didn't believe them. A few of my professors had told stories of seeing shadow people or feeling like they were being watched when they knew they were alone, but I thought that they were just messing with us freshmen. I spent most of my time in the costume shop. I should note the costume shop was on the sub-ground floor, technically the basement. It was down 2 flights of stairs from the main entrance that led you to a landing with the costume shop and another door that I just assumed was a utility closet because it was always locked. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was just something off about it to me. On this particular evening, I had finished rehearsal for a play around 6 p.m. and figured I would do a bit of cleaning in the costume shop while I waited for my roommate to meet me so that we could grab some dinner. I was outside the costume shop when I heard a knock on the door. I walked over and looked out the small window to the right side of the door expecting to see my roommate, but there was no one. I opened the door and stepped out, looking around. I looked down the hallway to the left of the door to see if my roommate was trying to freak me out. Nothing. I shrugged it off as me being tired and went back into the shop and shut the door behind me. I went about my business for a bit until I heard another knock on the door a few minutes later. I was more hesitant this time. I walked to the door and again I looked out the small window. Still there was no one outside. I tried to open the door, and while the handle turned, the door wouldn't budge. I pulled harder thinking maybe the door was stuck, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like someone was holding the door shut. I looked out the window again and still didn't see anyone. I was now frantically pulling on the handle, feeling the fear rising in my chest. I let go of the handle, only to have it start shaking wildly. Suddenly it stopped. Everything was quiet, with the exception of my own shaky breath. Then from outside the door I heard the sound of a door creaking open. I gathered my strength and tried the door. It opened and I cautiously walked onto the landing. The always locked door was ajar. Hello? Is anyone there? I tried not to sound freaked out, but I was absolutely terrified. I pulled open the door, but was greeted by a pitch-black staircase leading down. It smelt like a tomb sealed for 100 years, musty and ancient. I felt the wall for a light switch but couldn't find one, and I reached into my pocket for my cell phone and turned the screen on. It was bright enough that I could sort of see my way as I made my way down the stairs. The walls were brick and the stairs were made of stone. The closer I got to the bottom, the colder it became, and I was on the second to last step, straining to see what was in front of me. It was a door, a large stone door. I was about to move to the last step when I heard it. Her voice was deep and sounded like it was right in front of me, and it only said one word: "Welcome." I couldn't even scream. Instead, I ran up the stairs, tripping at some point and skinning my knee and shin. Once I reached the top, I slammed the door shut and ran out the building. My roommate showed up 5 minutes later to find me standing on the sidewalk shaking. After I told her what happened, she went inside to get my things and locked the costume shop door. When she came out, she looked at me with a worried expression. "The door was wide open when I went to get your stuff. Are you sure you closed it?" I just nodded my head. I walked home and didn't really talk more about it. I didn't go back into the building until the end of next week. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. When I finally did descend the stairs and felt a chill shoot through my body, I looked at the wall where the door had been, and there was nothing there. It was just a wall. I thought I was losing my mind. I walked to the wall and studied it. My drama teacher happened to be walking by and I stopped him. "Wasn't there a door here?" He chuckled. "Yeah, they walled it up last week. Did it in a hurry too, not entirely sure why though. I always thought it was a closet or something." I can't say what I encountered that night. Was it the spirit of a Freemason who never left the temple? Was it something more sinister? I honestly don't know. I spent a lot of time in that building over the course of my 2 years at the college, and while I had other odd experiences, they were nothing compared to what I experienced that one awful night. I'm from India. This happened in one of the southern states there, back in 2012. We were all staying at my grandma's place for summer vacation, as we're plantation owners. We have areca nuts, mostly, some coconut, coffee, and cocoa too. The thing about plantations that you'll find is that they are extremely secluded, apart from neighboring plantations, which are still a fair distance away. The nearest city is a 45-minute drive on any vehicle via a dirt road. There are no street lights whatsoever, so you better know your way. My grandma lives out there with my eldest maternal uncle and his family, and they usually walk around at night with no fear whatsoever, which is something that I would never do. I'm a bit scared of the dark. So during vacations, we all gathered at this plantation for a get-together. Now this includes our family, 2 of my mum's sisters and their families, and 2 of her brothers and their families. 6 siblings in total. We get there early, like 9 AM or so, and my aunt and their families are there a few days before us. Me being the eldest guy, I get pampered a lot because I have some badass elder sisters, and yet again, come off as a bit of a scaredy cat in comparison to them. Even my youngest 7-year-old cousin. She's absolutely fearless. But back to the story. So we all got there by 7 PM, except my youngest uncle, who was unmarried at the time. He's the only one who prefers the city to the plantation, and despite being religious, doesn't really participate in many of the activities. He's the only one to refuse to do a special rite of passage within our traditions. Maybe I'll talk about that another time. In their generation of about 14 guys in total, back in the day, it was a big deal. He lives in a major city which is a good 4-hour drive from the plantation, and to avoid traffic decided to drive in the evening and get here by 11 or so, which was a very bad idea. So we started driving at 8 PM from the house. We had an outdoor barbecue going around that time, but when 10 rolled around we were all getting quite tired, so decided to call it a night and figured he would just arrive whenever he did. We never lock the doors here because we have 6 huge dogs who we are more than confident guard the place perfectly adequately. Now, it's getting late, and there are small slopes and drops that lead to the front of our house, and it can be tough even for locals on the dirt road. So as you can imagine, taking these roads at night can be a little bit tricky. We all fall asleep, and then 1 AM rolls around and our dogs start barking, which is rare, because they're never together once we take them off their leashes for the night. So naturally we awoke, figuring that my uncle was home. We love him, because he's really cool, and so we peep out the window, and we're all sharing a huge room by the way, and we see that his car is stuck on the slope, and 2 of the dogs are circling the car with their tails tucked between their legs. That was all we thought. That is when we heard the howling, loud and sharp. I remember my nuts crawling to my throat. It was one of the dogs who was at the door, howling, facing the door. At first we thought our uncle had probably accidentally run over one of the dogs, which would have been terrible enough. But no, all of this happened in a matter of seconds. But it was so much to take in that it felt longer. Then our grandma and my eldest uncle opened the front door, and the dog howling at the door bolted at the car. At this point, 5 dogs were circling the car, sniffing and growling at God knows what. There was still a good 20 to 30 feet distance between the car and the house, so my grandma called out to Mama, asking him to park, and that the dogs wouldn't do anything, figuring he's scared of them. My uncle didn't respond. The car was dead. The only light was coming from the house, so my eldest uncle started walking towards the car, and thought perhaps he was having car trouble or something. So before he could reach halfway, my uncle opened the car door, but not the driver end, the rear one, like he wasn't driving at all, and started walking towards the house. We all thought it was weird for a second. Maybe he was just trying to be cool and pull a prank, but then he walked past the eldest uncle like he didn't even see him, same with Grandma. At this point we're all getting worried, so we cousins walk down and get a glimpse of our uncle before he dashes for the temple room inside the house. He looked so pale. His eyes were bloodshot, and we got scared, thinking he was drunk, and that he drove here in that state. Then it hit the fan. One of the dogs ran inside the house. The remaining were all outside, looking very, very nervous and whining, and not wanting to get in. My grandma and eldest uncle came in shortly after. By this point, everyone in the house was awake, and we kids were told to get back upstairs. But obviously we were way too close to pissing ourselves to even move. And then we heard this laughing. My youngest uncle was laughing in this deep voice that almost seemed demonic. I remember gripping my sister's arm and whimpering worse than the dogs when I heard it. For a second, every fearful memory seemed to crawl all over me, and all I wanted to do was to get up in a ball and cry. It seemed that was the general consensus among everyone who heard the laugh. My grandma approached my uncle, and he shot her this nasty look, and then started speaking in ancient Tulu, the South Indian language dialect. I couldn't understand a word of it, but my grandma did, and she just sobbed and yelled back at him. At this point, most of my cousins and aunts were in tears, and then my uncle started walking back to the door, saying something again in the strange dialect. At that point, my eldest uncle and my aunt's husband tackled and restrained him. He was then at the foot of the stairs between us and the adults. Keep in mind these are big guys and strong, and one of them was a commander in the army, and the other one a pro kabaddi player. And my eldest uncle can hold his own. He's 6'2" and well built, and between the 3 of them, it took all their combined strength to hold down a skinny 5'10" guy. My middle uncle, who seemed to be missing during the whole commotion, rushed in with a dude from a nearing plantation, a relative of ours. He's like my grandfather's cousin or something, but he's our uncle's age. He's a priest in our community. So he came in, and they all went to the temple room, grabbed the ceremonial kalash and a sword, and the tirith, which is like holy water, and I kid you not, he started talking to Mama in the same dialect. He then touched the hilt of the sword to his forehead and started chanting. My uncle thrashed and throbbed like he was, well, possessed, and then he emptied the holy water on his head. My uncle went limp and fell to the floor. He started seizing up, and my uncles turned him on his side. He was dazed as hell, started crying, and then threw up all over the floor. My grandma was stunned and crying in a chair. Everyone was in tears. The dogs refused to leave, and the rest were at the doorstep. My aunt tried to shoo them away, but they didn't budge. The priest insisted we let them stay. They saved his uncle's life. Then we heard this thump outside. We were too scared to move, but the commander uncle went outside. The car that was stuck on the slope had rolled down and bumped against the house. The priest went out and did the same swordy thing to the car. Instead of the hilt, he used the blade, and asked no one to approach it until sunrise. It was around 1 AM at that point. Everyone was too messed up to go back to sleep, and the house smelt like puke, wet dog, and, scarily, of smoke. My uncle had passed out. We kids were all huddled up in the hall, and the adults were all talking. One of my uncles was keeping watch on the uncle who was in the other room. I can't remember when I fell asleep. I don't remember dreaming or anything, and honestly, when I woke up, I was thinking that this was all just a dream. In the morning at 7 or so, my uncles decided to move the car to the garage, and that's when we saw it. A faint red handprint on the windshield. The spooky part, it was on the inside of the driver's side. Oh, and that dialect. I pestered my eldest cousin for days, and she finally translated it for me. The thing he kept repeating over and over was, "I'm going to take your son to where you won't find what's left of him." I have some friends near Shiprock that are big into researching about Bigfoot and skinwalkers. They've been featured in shows like Finding Bigfoot, Coast to Coast AM, and countless podcasts that speak about the paranormal, and on several History Channel programs. These people are the real deal. A few years ago, my wife and I were on a vacation, and part of our trip would be driving through their town. Taking advantage of this opportunity, we decided to spend a few nights out there and hang out with them. We met up, went to dinner, and talked about our personal paranormal experiences and recent Bigfoot or skinwalker sightings. I wanted to experience searching for skinwalker evidence for myself, so during the course of our conversation, I asked if they were willing to take me out on the field the following night and search for the elusive creatures. Being that most of them are Native American, they were very hesitant, and only one of them agreed to it. The rest of the group decided to meet us on my last night there to take me to Sasquatch instead. The following day, my friend arrived to the hotel and picked me up at 5 p.m. We must have driven for about an hour and a half out of town, mostly through dirt roads to a place locally known to have a lot of skinwalker activity. By the time we reached the location, everything was dark. He shuts the trick off, and like in most paranormal investigations, we sit and wait, trying to listen for anything out of the ordinary. For the most part, it was quiet. Other than a bunch of annoying crickets making noises, nothing much happens. My buddy told me about recent sightings and his own encounters with these medicine men. Long story short, after about an hour, he told me to get out of the truck, walk outside, and towards the front of it to try and listen out for anything. He said that if anything happened, he would immediately turn the lights on and light up whatever might be there. Basically, he wanted me to be human skinwalker bait. I was hesitant for a moment, but since I had a weapon on me, I thought it to be okay. But I also knew that bullets would not do much to a skinwalker. Just as I had made my decision to get out of his truck, the night turned ever darker. This wasn't a regular dark night type of dark. This darkness had a purpose to it. It felt extremely ominous. It also got extremely cold, and we both noted that all the little critters had suddenly gone quiet. After hesitating for a while, I decided to open the truck doors to get out, but as I did, and had my foot ready to touch the ground, we heard a loud whistle. It wasn't a distant whistle, like the air brings towards you. This was next to us. It sounded like it was inside the cab of a truck. Obviously, I thought someone had snuck up on us or that my buddy was trying to mess with me. But when I looked at him, he had turned white. The expression on his face had totally changed, seeing that he was afraid. That naturally put me on high alert. I tried to snap him out of it, but he seemed frozen in place. The whistling continued for a few times, and I was screaming at my friend at this point. Eventually he came to his senses and began to react to what was happening around us. He then immediately turned his truck on. We grabbed our flashlight and looked all over the place to see what the hell was out there, but of course we found no one. Feeling nervous, and him being native, we decided to leave the place right away. The next day, him and a few other friends picked me up again and took me out at night to search for Bigfoot near Shipwalk Mountain. While investigating, we found what's known in the field as a Bigfoot nest. Inside the nest were tons of dried out eaten animals, carcasses and bones, mostly deer. As we're trying to figure out what lived there, we suddenly heard a loud yelp. It wasn't a coyote or mountain lion type of yelp. This is the yelp you felt in your bones. You could feel the vibration in your chest. Of course, we all started searching around to see what it was. I didn't see anything, but two of my partners saw something move up on the ridge. They were scared enough to draw and cock their weapons, and about 10 minutes later, we began to hear several footsteps all around us. We couldn't see who or what it was because it was really dark, even with our flashlights turned on. After hearing these footsteps getting closer and closer, and less afraid of us, we ended up leaving the area hastily. These are my personal experiences and they're all true. I don't expect many people to believe me. My late friend, JC Johnson, and I talked many times about what happened. I'm still in contact with everyone who took me out on those nights. I still go out to the field here in Nevada, trying to see if I can catch anything. I'm a female volunteer for the fire department, and this happened a few years back when I was 20. During our drills at my former department, our bay doors are open so people have been known to walk in and talk to us and ask questions or just look at the trucks. One evening, this 23-year-old dude strolls by, a fellow firefighter from another town, which isn't uncommon. Firemen stop by other departments all the time when in town. He made his rounds and was talking to my chief, my captain, and the young guys, and he made his way over to me and started chatting me up. He was a nice guy, good looking, and we exchanged Snapchats. It didn't take us long to figure out that he was a psycho. A week after talking with me, he messages me, "So how come you didn't swipe right?" Confused, I asked him what he meant, and then this unfolded. He told me all of this in an attempt to impress me with how devoted he was. He found me on a dating app, used my profile picture from the dating app to find my Facebook, since in one of my Facebook pictures I'm wearing a uniform that had my last name. Definitely my bad. He then used my profile picture to find out what fire department I was on by looking closely at the fire truck in the background. He told me he walked by my fire department almost every day to see when we drilled and to spot me, and that he's telling me this. I'm confused as heck, and he then goes, "I'm having a pretty rough day. Can I come over?" Cue to him telling me he's on his way. He used my Snapchat location to find my work and house. My location now is off on everything. When he arrived, he brought a love letter and gifts. He said he was sorry and confused and just really wanted things to work out. I told him that he needed to leave and never speak to me again, to which he obliged by leaving, saying if that would make me happy. He then made 3 to 4 new Snapchat and Facebook profiles in an attempt to add me back. At one point he got clever and made his Snapchat username Chris Smith 1990, which made me go, "Hey, it's my friend Chris Smith." Lo and behold, it isn't. Once I realized it wasn't my friend, but instead the psycho, he asked what I could do to make it up. I texted get lost and to set himself on fire, and then I got a video of him walking into the woods, and then he did that. He flicked a lighter over his hand, and I thought, haha, yeah. Then his entire hand and arm lit up, followed by screaming, and it cut out. I started to freak out thinking, oh crap, and immediately got a photo of the hairs on his knuckles and arms burnt off and his burnt shirt. He was okay and was coated in something flammable, but something that wouldn't actually damage him. Creep. I blocked him again. He stopped coming over after he presented himself at my house, and he saw that I had a firearm. I didn't know how to use it, and I wasn't planning on using it in fairness, but it sent the point across. When I was around 8, my 32-year-old aunt found out that her cancer had returned and was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer that had spread to her stomach, lungs, and spine. At the time, I wasn't familiar with cancer, just knew that it was a bad disease. My family told us she had cancer, but did not elaborate any further. The day she received her diagnosis, all of the adults, my gammy, my papa, 5 aunts and uncles and my mum, dropped myself and about 5 or 6 of my cousins off at another relative's house to keep an eye on us. We were all young, not knowing what was really going on, but we all felt like something big was going to happen. I've always been an anxious and extremely empathetic person. For a while I could guess what people were thinking. I knew stuff that there was no way I could know. The adults returned and were visibly upset. They told us it's not good, but that we were going to fight it and the doctors are going to try everything they can. Fast forward a few months. Me and my cousin are sleeping over at my aunt's, and she got me alone and asks me something along the lines of, "How much longer do you think I have? When do you think I'm gonna die?" She had a son that was around 3 at the time, and in my gut I knew she didn't have long. I thought I would be nice and give her hope, so I tell her, "When Mac is about 7. She immediately bursts into tears and screams, "Thanks a lot." That really disturbed me, and kind of broke something in me. I didn't know what to do or say. I thought I was being good and giving her time. After that, I tiptoed around her and didn't really engage with her anymore. She ended up passing 4 months later. My cousin and I slept over at my Grammy's and slept in her room with the light on before my aunt's burial. The morning of, I'm waking up, but don't actually want to get out of bed yet. So I'm just laying on the little bed that's set perpendicularly at the foot of Gammy's, with my cousin wiping my eye boogers away, trying to move too much so that I don't wake my cousin and annoy her. My eyes are closed, but I'm definitely awake. I start to blink, my eyes clear of them, and I can see my now deceased aunt walk into the room. She's wearing the bright red outfit with a little Christmas teddy bear jingle necklace that one of the kids gave her that we were going to bury her in. I can hear it make a jingle, but muffled because it's up against her clothes, almost like she was trying for it to be quiet as possible. I'm squinting at her, and I'm in disbelief. I have no reaction or emotion, I'm just in shock. She walks over to Gammy, who's still sleeping, and leans over for a bit, turns around and walks out the room. As she passes by me, I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. When she got in the hallway, the jingling got louder and more pronounced, like she didn't care if it did make a noise. I tried telling people about it, but of course no one believed me. Just a little kid trying to be cute, saying she saw her aunt, blah blah blah. My second experience. I was driving with Gammy, her niece and my cousin, out to a property that Gamley's family owned, and her niece starts talking about the witches in the family. Apparently, it's a generational thing, and each generation passes it personally on to the next. Gammy acted like she didn't know anything about it. So, I've got witchy blood? My dreams. I've heard from a few people and even read online in dream dictionaries that dreaming of fish means someone's going to be pregnant. I dreamt that a family member or close friend and I are on the beach, or on a boat, or in a canal. There's a huge fish in the water, and initially we're both freaked out, but then the friend or family member will jump in the water with the fish. A few months later, I'd forgotten about the dream, and I find out that they're pregnant. I had a dream that my aunt was breastfeeding her son. Googled it, and it could mean illness. Turns out she has some rare blood disease. Didn't know she was ill. One time in high school, I dreamt that me and one of my friends were going to meet up with someone to buy some weed, but my friend lost her money. The next day I meet up with my friend in my dream and another mutual friend. The mutual friend starts with, "Last night me and her were going to meet up with, thingy? And I cut her off and tell them about my dream. Get the requisite. That's so weird. A lot of times I'll dream of random scenarios or scenes, and a few days later these things will play out. The scariest dreams for me, though, if I have premonitions, are the dreams where my daughters and I are in a horrible plane or boat accident and my youngest drowns. Always a plane or on a boat, and it's always my youngest. Cue anxiety-induced paranoia. Well, my friends, if you've made it this far, I salute you. Thankfully, none of the bad things have happened to my immediate family just yet, unless they're mentioned here. Let's hope my dreams are wrong. I was 14 years old when I had to live with my grandparents. I had to live with them because my sister was in college and my parents were divorced. They lived in this old bungalow-type house. It was one story, and we have stairs that immediately go up to the attic. An attic which no one really uses. We just put stuff in there. It's too hot and stuffy up there anyway. The sole window up there didn't really help. The attic had an old, creaky wooden floor that I remember that I had to polish with a coconut shell, because that's how we do it here in the Philippines. That, and my grandparents are very traditional. The door to my room was near the stairs leading up to the attic. Like, you open my door and then face right, and the stairs would be immediately there. I hated that every time I left my room, I would see them, because it's almost like I would expect something to crawl down from there. One night, my grandparents had to pick up my aunt's family from the airport, but because of the hellish traffic here, they had to leave at 7 p.m, and their expected arrival back home would be around 5 a.m. at most. So, as a 14-year-old girl being home alone at night, I told them that I would be safe and fine. We live in a gated community, and we have plenty of guard dogs, so everything would be okay. Or so I thought. Before they left, we already had dinner, so I was stuck with cleaning the dishes and all of that. Whilst I was cleaning them, I could hear a bunch of neighboring dogs barking. It didn't really bother me, because they're dogs, they always bark. Once I was done, I locked every door and window and turned off all the lights before heading to bed. As I got into my room, the lights were on and everything looked normal. My anime posters were on the walls, my closet was untouched, my bed was next to my barred tinted windows that we had to tint because I was on the first floor, and my grandparents wanted to make sure no one would peep into a young girl's room. They were barred too because my uncle, who used the room, always escaped through there to get to parties, and this was my grandparents' solution to that. Of course, they never got them removed. Nothing was out of place to alarm me. Everything was normal. That is until I turned off the lights. As soon as I hit the switch, a silhouette of a man was illuminated by the streetlight outside. He appeared to have thick curly hair, a skinny build, and I thought that I was having a hallucination. I turned the lights on again and he was gone, and then I flipped the switch once more to reveal him once again. I sighed in relief. I obviously was just tricking myself, or perhaps something else was casting a shadow. I double-locked my door to be safe, one with a doorknob lock and one of those door latch type locks, and tucked myself in. It was hard to fall asleep because of all the dogs barking outside. They weren't our dogs, it was the neighbors. But I was finally falling asleep when I heard something move from above me. Something in the attic. I pushed the thought to the back of my mind that I must be tricking myself, and I hugged my pillow, trying to tell myself that it was just rats. These rats seemed heavy. They were also pushing my furniture around. My heart sank when I heard them hurriedly go down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I covered myself with my blanket and I waited for something. I was also wishing that my parents had given me a phone, but I waited with bated breath. Suddenly I heard my doorknob being gently fiddled. I wanted to vomit when I heard a click, followed by a quiet turn of the knob. The knob turned but didn't budge. When they noticed, they tried to push it. This time I had finally stood up, shaking. I was a kid, home alone with no phone, no means of defense. All that was saving me was this thick door from the old days. I softly pushed my body up against the door and locked everything up again. I didn't want to make a sound and didn't want to scream and didn't want him to know I was there. I don't know why he stopped, but he did. I didn't get back to bed though. I just sat there at the door waiting. It felt like forever. I heard footsteps ascend the stairs, but I was just still sat there. I saw something move from the corner of my eye. There, out the window, the shadow was back. I forced myself not to look, and all I could think of was thank goodness they were barred. I don't remember what happened after that. I think I probably passed out from exhaustion, or was just so scared that I fell asleep. Either way, I remember the next day when my family and I were finally having breakfast, and I casually brought it up with my grandfather that I thought I heard footsteps in the attic last night. My grandmother scoffed. It's probably rats. I never brought it up again. I didn't want them to worry. It probably was, right? Our dogs were caged up near the gate and were far from my room, so they wouldn't have seen anything. The only dogs who could have been near my room, via proximity, were of course the neighbors. There was also nothing outside my window that could cast a shadow to look like a man. And lastly, the attic window, when I investigated, was propped open. I've always had a very peaceful life, raised by respectable parents who lived in a decent town and pretty much sheltered by the evils of this world. When I was in my early 20s, I had a few friends. They weren't bad kids by any means, but didn't use their heads and chose the best people to choose to be around. One night my friends Zach and James were out cruising around. Now Zach and James did have an issue with drugs. I was never so easily persuaded by peer pressure, nor pursued a life to impress anyone. However, I had no problem standing my ground with anyone. Sometimes it's best if you walk away from any situation that you feel could go wrong, which is something I should have done that night. Luckily, I'm still here to share this story. I was out cruising with Zach and James, and they make poor choices in life. They decide they want to score some dope from a friend called Carly. She was an okay person, just another soul who became an addict. I was okay with going, although it was never my kind of scene. However, when I arrived, there are some people that I'd never met before. Have you ever met people and you instantly just get bad vibes from them? Well, this is one of those moments where you assess a situation and know you should just say, "Hey, I'm gonna go see another friend," and walk away. I had that feeling that these guys aren't good people, and I should have listened to my gut instinct, but didn't. We walked into Carly's house, and I just got the sense that these people aren't the kind I want to associate with. Instead, I sit there and wait for Zach and James to do their thing and get the hell out. Well, it's not going as fast as I would like. That's when a guy called Ricky starts asking me a bunch of questions like where I'm from and who do I know. I'm sitting there playing it cool, listing off some people I know. There was one person who was known well, an old baseball team member and schoolmate, who was a very troubled soul who got into plenty of trouble. "Do you know Bishop?" I said. That's when the Q&A session stopped and became a heated ordeal. I guess Bishop and Ricky had some beef with one another, and things escalated quickly. Ricky began making threats towards me, saying he was going to call up one of his friends which knew the friend as well. The other one was well known for violence, and he was from the same small town as I was. Me being an idiot, I stood up and continued the senseless argument, with him threatening me, and that no one would ever find me when he was done with me. I foolishly spout back the same ignorance to him, despite it not being my nature. At the time, I just thought if I stood my ground, I would get respect. Carly's mum came in the room and told everyone they need to calm down and asked me to leave, to which I happily obliged. Fast forward 10 years in the future. I moved from my home state to Illinois and came back to visit family and friends. I was talking to my friend Jared, who was one of the closest friends I had for about half my life. He brought up the fact that Carly had passed away from an overdose, and he said, "Did you hear about her boyfriend Ricky?" I said no and asked what happened. Apparently, he had taken a girl from a local university, a ballerina, and the specifics of what he did to her are too horrific to mention, but let's just say her remains were found in the woods. He was caught, convicted, and is now serving life in prison. Sadly, Carly and Ricky had a child together. Carly, of course, passed away, and the child's father is serving life in prison. My friend Zach also passed of an overdose as well a few years back. The world of drugs is a very dark place, filled with people who are just as dark as the world they live in. Take my advice. If you find yourself in a situation you feel is uncomfortable and possibly dangerous, just turn around and leave. I got lucky, as things could have been much more deadlier. A year ago, my apartment complex decided they wanted to renovate my unit, so I had to move out at the end of my lease. I live in Denver, and rent is pretty ridiculous here. So I started worrying about finding something affordable in my neighborhood, which I love. I posted on the Nextdoor app to see if anyone in my neighborhood knew of any affordable rentals in my area. I immediately got a message from someone named Joe, who said that one of the condos in his complex was going to be up for rent soon, and he knew the owner. He offered to get me in touch with them, and I asked if he could send me pictures of the unit, and he asked if he could text me some pictures his neighbor took, because the chat function on the app is really slow. Now I feel stupid for doing this, but I gave him my phone number. I kid you not, I received a phone call from an unknown number within seconds. I normally don't answer calls from unknown numbers, but I was expecting a call from a number that wasn't saved in my phone, so I answered it. I was completely bewildered when the person said, "Hey, it's Joe. How's your day going?" Huh? It took me by surprise and I didn't know what to say. He started to talk on and on about the phone, about how he works nights and how tired he is and how he takes care of his daughter while his girlfriend works during the day, la 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 la. I finally interrupted and said, "So, about the condo?" He pretty much disregarded that and said, "I don't think my girlfriend would appreciate me talking to you, but I don't have to tell her, right?" I said I have to go and immediately hung up. As soon as I did that, he started texting me. It was really bizarre and alarming. I blocked his number and moments later, he found me on Facebook and sent me a friend request. I'm 32 years old, but it was so disturbing to me that I called my parents to tell them about how unnerved it made me. And the worst part was that on Nextdoor, even if your exact address isn't listed, your complex is. I was pretty certain that I didn't have my address visible on my profile, but it checked. And sure enough, the unit number was public, along with my address. Unable to contact me any other way, he started messaging me again and again on Nextdoor, asking if I wanted to go on a walk with him. You can't block or report people on the app, so I deleted it. One night a month or so later, I had a knock at my door around 10 on a weeknight. I looked at my peephole but couldn't get a good look at the person. He had his head slightly down, and either way, I don't answer the door for anyone I'm not expecting, especially not a random guy at 10 at night. Feeling panicked, I called my neighbor across the hall. She's an older woman, and we look out for each other since we both live alone. I asked her if it looked like he was a delivery guy at the wrong door. She opened her door to get a look at the guy, and that spooked him because he literally ran away. I have no idea if this was the Nextdoor guy or not, but my gut tells me it was. This was a big wake-up call. I always felt like I practiced good online safety, but I didn't even know my address was visible on Nextdoor. I'll never be casual or lazy about privacy settings like that again. And another story. When I was 18, I was still living at home and started dating a guy who was 20 and lived with roommates. I broke up with him after a few months, when I learnt he was getting into coke. He didn't take it all too well. One night a few months later, I was up late studying and I had a test the next day. I shut my light off at around 2 a.m. and as I did so I heard some rustling around outside. Next thing I know, there's a knock on my bedroom window. I was startled and having no idea who was outside, I yelled for my dad. This story is more funny than scary, but my dad then comes running into my room in his underwear with a baseball bat, his hair all messed up. "Who is it?" And the person said, "It's Josh, sir." My dad said, "You aren't dating anymore, go home, Romeo." Then Josh yells, "I just want to talk to you, please come with me." My dad threatened to kick his ass, so he took off. I looked out the window and saw that he sped off in a car with a couple of his friends. I have no idea what his plan was, but he wanted me to go with him. Could have been entirely innocent, but you know, you get that gut feeling when you get it. This is a small piece of the entire story, and I swear it's true. I woke up one night and checked my phone to see if my son had texted me goodnight. He has done this every day for years. I looked over and noted that it was 2:20 a.m. I put my phone away and stared up at the ceiling, lying on my back, waiting for sleep. My wife was beside me, spooning my side, with her back to the only window in the room, which was about 20 feet from her, to my right. About 10 feet to my left was a walk-in closet and bathroom. Both doors were closed. Behind my head was the headboard and outside wall. My feet extended out towards our other bathroom wall. Our bedroom door was closed as usual, and our only window, which opens to the parking lot 3 floors below, was mostly blocked with a blackout shade and decorative curtains. A small amount of light from a street light just outside crept into the room and gave the black shade an almost vague orange glow. As I stared up at the ceiling attempting to fall asleep, I noticed that the air in the room felt thick, like static on a TV, and I could see tiny bits of light flickering all over my peripheral. There seemed to be a noise in the background like TV static, and I assumed it was my imagination, but I began to feel very, very scared. I attempted to close my eyes, but the scary feeling turned into a danger feeling. I turned to my right to wake up my wife, as she usually comforts me when I have issues of this kind, when I noticed a large figure standing in front of the window, partially behind the curtain, and my fight or flight instantly kicked in. I felt imminent danger, but at the same time, it didn't feel possible. So I closed my eyes tightly and reopened them. The figure immediately took a sidestep to its left, and now I could see the whole thing in its entirety. It was big and dark, possibly shiny. It was very tall, had long arms, and I swear it had horns. It was totally silent. The static shh sound was all that I could hear. I knew it wasn't possible, but I was in total panic. My body was telling me to run. I blinked. It had moved closer. I began shaking my wife and screaming her name over and over, and each time I looked up at the thing, it was closer than before. I couldn't understand why she wouldn't wake up. I shook her harder and harder, yelling at her as loud as I could, practically screaming her name, and fighting the urge to run, but knowing that if she didn't wake up immediately, something horrible and violent was going to happen. The last time I looked up, it was towering over us only a few steps away, and I couldn't catch my breath. And then she was holding me, and her bedside lamp was on, and everything was totally quiet. She told me I had been screaming in my sleep, screaming loudly like she'd never heard before. She says that she couldn't wake me, that I just screamed and tried to fight her off. I was almost crying. That was one of the worst events I'd ever had, and it absolutely terrified me. I know most of you were going to say it was a dream or sleep paralysis or perhaps a night terror, but to me it was real. It occurred at a time in my life where strange and unexplained things were happening to me frequently. Long story short, over a 6-year-ish period in my life, something was trying to make me end my own life. Something was slowly affecting every aspect of my life, playing the long game. During this time I had regular paranormal experiences. I lost my high-paying career, lost my house, both my cars, nearly all my possessions, and became estranged from my son, my parents, and all my loved ones. Eventually I got a divorce, was charged with crimes I didn't commit, and was faced with more hardship and depression than I thought that I could possibly survive. This is not a story of how I found Jesus, although I have always been a Christian, but I do believe this could have been demonic. I've read true accounts of others who have been led to near taking their life over a long period of time by something malevolent. I'm glad to say that many years later, everything ended up working out. All of my immediate family, that is, blood related to me, have a bit of a paranormal edge. Like, we're nothing amazing that people will be wowed by, but we can all do something a smidge out of the ordinary. My mother has what I call death knell dreams. She dreams of people when they're about to pass away, maybe a few hours before, and if she's within physical distance, she tries to go to them so that they don't pass alone. My older sister gets precognitive messages via radio, which funnily enough is a sign of schizophrenia, but she's never been wrong, so we've never been worried. My older brother can see spirits, and really anything non-physical. We come from a background where this ability is almost expected of him, so we don't pay it much mind. Then there's me, a mishmash of weirdness. Sometimes I can see things, sometimes I hear things, and sometimes I just know there's something there. I've always been able to do it, but it's pretty inconsistent, and I usually chalk it up to the fact I don't necessarily want to notice these things. So on to the most memorable experiences I've had, and the one that leads me to my question. When I was a freshman in college, my family got a Netflix subscription. I would be staying up late in the living room doing homework and listening to shows in the background, while everyone else is asleep. One of the first shows I binged was Medium. It basically is a show about an Arizona housewife who sees spirits and solves their crimes. The show is pretty average, but it makes her abilities seem really amazing in a nice and mundane sort of way. After binge watching 5 episodes, I thought, for the first time in my life and without fear, maybe it wouldn't be so bad seeing the spirits. Might actually be pretty cool. Just that. Just a thought in passing. Not 5 minutes later, I turned from where I was sitting on the couch, thanks to what I can only assume was my sixth sense, and I saw a large glowing light rush down the hallway and vanish through the wall. No, it wasn't even in the corner of my eye. It was the reflection of the light, because how even? I wasn't even close to any windows, because then it may have been a passing car. It was 8 feet in front of me, and travelled in the trajectory in front of my face. I'm a scaredy cat, guys, and when I say I screamed, I take it back. I mean I screamed it loud, and I never backtracked so hard in my life. I've seen a few things since, but nothing so aggressive or blatant as that night. The one factor that I think was different was that I wasn't afraid that night. I was perfectly comfortable and chilled. All my other experiences have been nerve-wracking experiences, and they've all been far less alarming. So here's my question. Do you think seeing spirits is a choice? If we just weren't scared and a bit more open? Do you think all of us would be able to perceive the paranormal? Or do you think there is a circumstance unique to me and my family? Hope to hear from you guys soon. I live in rural Appalachia and adore the wilderness. I often invite friends to come out and camp with me. One, because I enjoy sharing the wilderness with people close to me, and two, because there's a creature that lives in my woods. A couple of years ago, maybe 4 or 5, my aunt bought a small cabin from the Amish and placed it there. She intended it to be used as a playhouse for my younger cousin, but my cousin never enjoyed it and could never stay a full night there. The weekend off of school came around, and I called out my friend to see if he'd like to stay in the woods with me for the weekend. He agreed and had his mum bring him out. We started walking and made it not even halfway to our destination when he asked if we could just stay in the new cabin for a night or two, because the weather said it was going to storm anyway. So we walked back to the top of the hill so that I could text my aunt, and she gave me the okay. It was starting to get dark, so we went ahead and settled down completely in the cabin and started eating what was supposed to be camping rations. We spoke for hours until we looked out the window and noticed it was getting dark and the rain was coming out. We decided it was best to lay down and get to sleep. He passed out almost instantly, leaving me alone in pitch darkness listening to the sound of heavy rain hitting the tin roof. I didn't even realize I fell asleep until I heard a loud knocking and rattling on the door and figured my buddy went out to pee or something. The door had a large window, and I could clearly see someone standing there. I was dreading having to crawl out the blankets into the slightly moist, cold air to let him in after he somehow locked himself out. So I rolled over to prepare to stand up, and I was facing his bed, which I couldn't really make out a shape 100% from, but as I forced my eyes I could tell he was still in it. I froze and was in pure terror for what seemed like at least an hour, when I heard the thing at the door make a sound akin to clearing its throat and running into the woods. I waited at least 20 minutes before asking my friend if he was awake, and he immediately said, "Yeah." "Did you see that thing and hear it too?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Were you awake when it was whispering?" "No," I replied. We lay there too scared to move or make a sound above a whisper for hours. I would start drifting off and almost immediately would start hearing something tap on the windows, but I would try my best to ignore it, even when I could clearly hear something rubbing its finger on the edge of the tin roof on my side of the cabin. Morning came, and I felt like death. My buddy didn't feel as bad and apparently thought the figure was a dream. But he quickly realized that it couldn't be, the more details that I brought up. We packed up and started to make our way back to my house. Halfway up the hill to my house, I realized the scariest part of everything the night had to offer was that we never locked the door. The rest of the way up my hill was spent with me constantly looking over my shoulder down at the cabin. To this day, I haven't spent another night in it or gave it a glance for longer than 2 seconds on my way to the woods. I was driving home one night under a new moon February sky. Not a single cloud, and the Milky Way was gorgeous. I had been driving for a while, as it was an 1.5-hour trip, when I noticed something odd in the sky. A void, something blocking the stars. This was odd because, 1, it was in the opposite direction of the moon's position. 2, it was large, and big enough that I could see its triangular outline. 2 long sides, 1 shorter. At first I dismissed it as a cloud, nothing abnormal, but its outline was 3 straight lines, not natural. Once I realized this, I kinda got nervous. As I kept driving, I estimated it to be under 1 kilometer off the ground and hovering in place, and I was starting to get closer to it, with the road I was on seeming to pass underneath it. With my brain going into full X-Files mode, I started to feel jittery as my brain was trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Before I got underneath it, despite my brain telling me to get away, I pulled over and got out to see it better. This was in 2005, before I had a cell phone. So I stood there in the dark in the middle of nowhere, staring at a big wedge in the sky. No wind, no noise, just calm and quiet. And after about a minute of standing there, it seemed to start moving, almost spinning in place, the long front moving around towards where I was standing. I started to panic a bit, realizing that I might have really messed up when the UFO lit up several lights under it and they began pulsing, almost like the blinkers at a crosswalk. The lights flashed in yellow, blue, green, then instantaneously there was a muffled whomp and it was gone. The obscured stars were now visible, and a slight breeze kicked up. Needless to say, I got back in my car, drove like crazy to get home, and had a double shot of whiskey and was up all night. I've replayed this in my head and analysed every possible explanation, but there is only one, and I'll go to my grave knowing that aliens exist. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, very close to Stone Mountain State Park. I'm an avid hiker, and I've hiked many miles in these mountains. There is a large number of granite boulders at the base of this mountain, some as big as a small cabin. They have always been fascinating to me, and when you enter the wooded area, where the boulders are, there is an eerie quiet seemingly void of wildlife. This happened last year while hiking with my boyfriend and our dogs. We had seen a couple of the waterfalls that day, and were going to hike to the lower falls. There had been very heavy rain for a few days, and I knew this trail had several creek crossings. I decided I didn't want to get wet, and told my boyfriend to go on without me and that I would wait. The falls were only another half-mile or so ahead. My boyfriend and the dogs go on the creek and then disappear out of my line of sight. As soon as I couldn't see them anymore, I was suddenly aware of how quiet the woods were. There were no birds chirping or squirrels rustling leaves. I don't usually get spooked, but all of a sudden, I had this overwhelming sense of dread. I felt as if something was watching me, and I couldn't shake the feeling. I had an urge to run after my boyfriend and started the creek crossing when I saw him come dashing back towards me. He too had an overwhelming sense of dread, and didn't get 10 minutes down the trail before he turned back and ran to me. He said he couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to attack me. And this was at 11 AM on a summer's day, so not very big cat or bear kind of time. The next incident was very scary because I was alone with our dog. We were hiking the same section of Stone Mountain, but a different trail called Wolf Rock. On the way up I had seen many trees that were scorched, but that could have been due to lightning. I started getting an ominous feeling, so started picking up the pace to head back. When I was about a mile from my car, I heard what can only be described as a supersonic boom. It shook the ground and rattled the trees. It spooked me and my dog so badly, we ran most of the way back to the car. Later I tried describing the sound to my boyfriend to no avail, since I've never heard anything like it. Not gunfire, not a plane, not a rock slide, which I've all heard before, but while reading another person's story, it sparked my memory. They described the sound like that of a giant sledgehammer hitting a tin wall. That's the best way I can describe the noise I heard. That metallic bang reverberating through the woods was very unsettling. This experience didn't happen to me but my friend. They were working during the day when the command had training. We all go to basketball stadium and listen to people talk. After the training, we go home and it's about 11. Great waste of time. My friend and I had watch and didn't get to go back. They were sitting there and the commanding officer walks in. The pleasantries are exchanged and the commanding officer goes to their office. After a few hours, the commanding officer calls and asks, "I thought you said no one was here." "Yes, sir. You're the only one here. You, myself, and the rover." He then asked the rover to go walk around because he was very clearly hearing talking and walking down the hall. Remember, there's only one way in and one way out of this building, so you know when people come and go. Rover left, walked around the outside, and all fences were locked. We went first floor again, and the common area was empty. The offices were locked, and the second floor and common areas were clear. The commanding office was open with all the others locked. Rover came back and reported what they found, and the friend asked them if they went into the basement, which was a former morgue, and the kids said no, so away they went. During his look, he found and discovered that he could hear the commanding officer talking through a vent on the second floor. So as he's checking the area, he comes to the place where the lockers and old workout equipment is. He flips the light on in there, flips off the light, and then he hears a rattle. So he turns the lights on again, and now a locker is open. He couldn't remember for sure if it was open before or not, so he turns off the light and hears what sounds like music, and maybe a radio, coming from the locker, and the slamming of a metal door. At that point the kid ran, and they called the commanding officer and told him no one was around. There was also another occasion where I was standing watch, and the ground had a big crash and shake, like a server rack fell over. Someone went to look and there was nothing on the floor. No one has any explanation for that. There are also reports of a headless nurse, but I haven't seen her. A nurse would make sense, since that's where all the deaths from the Pearl Harbor attack happened. This happened to me while I was still in high school, and would have been somewhere between 2005 to 2006. To this day, the experience gives me chills, and I cannot explain it. I am interested to see if someone here has experienced something like it, or heard of it before. After church one Sunday night, my friend and I were taking my cousin back to his house before heading to a restaurant to meet some friends. My cousin at the time lived way back in the woods, some 6 to 8 miles down a very secluded gravel road in the Ozarks of Missouri. It was in the fall, so all the trees were bare. It was a new moon and very dark. Anyway, my friend and I dropped my cousin off without a hitch and began making our way back out of the woods, back to the main country road that would take us back to town. About halfway down the gravel road, back to the country road, we came around a curve and started heading up a small hill that crested about 60 yards ahead of us. When we saw this hill, there looked to be a single deer standing on the crest in the middle of the road. Being that this is the middle of the country, this is not too uncommon obviously, but I thought nothing of it and figured it would run off as we got closer. I remember very vividly that as we were about halfway of the distance between us and it, what I thought was a deer suddenly became very apparent that it was not a deer. Instead, it was a very solid but translucent ball of dense fog or mist, about the size of a deer. It was not standing on the road, but hovered about a meter above it, and was not moving. At the time I thought I might be seeing a smudge on my windscreen, so I reached to wipe the window, but it was nothing, and remained on the road. When we got close enough that my headlights illuminated this thing in full, it slowly rose up into the air, until it was about 20 feet off the ground, paused for a second, and then shot very fast into the woods to the right. I stopped the car and both my friend and I sat there in silence for a few minutes, and then we continued back down the country road, where my friend, who has never swore, finally broke the silence. "What the F was that?" where my friend, who never swears, finally broke the silence. What the flip was that? We still talk about this until this day. This experience was quite jarring, and I will not drive between that road again at night. Has anyone ever heard of anything akin to this? I'd love to know what it could have possibly been. This happened back in the 90s, when I was still in primary school, so I really had no clue how much danger I was in. I would have been around 11, living in a regional city of Australia. For the last year I had been having a lot of trouble at school, getting bullied a bit by classmates and felt really singled out by my teacher. My mom worked around the corner from my school, so when everything would get too much at school, I would literally just walk out of class, down the road and onto her work site. It would take me about half an hour to walk there along a main road. A few times I noticed a small white car drive past me slowly, but I only noticed this because I would see the same car go up and down the street as I was walking and while I was sitting outside of my mum's work site. After a while I started seeing the same car driving up my street at home and parked along the streets that my brother and I would ride our bikes around in. I didn't usually see the same cars and people. It was just like, oh, there goes that car again. My family followed a serious routine. Mondays, swimming and tutoring. Tuesdays, netball training. Wednesday, netball game. Thursday, basketball training. Fridays, we would go and see professional basketball or football, depending on the season. Saturday was my brother's basketball games, and Sunday were our days to go to the rivers with friends or swims or barbecue lunch. It never changed unless someone was sick. So on Friday night I'm dressed and ready to go watch the basketball game, but I can't find my shoes. I'm pretty sure that they're in the car, which is in a garage under our 2-story house. To get it, I have to walk down the outside steps at the front of our house, which has a full view of the road. I walk out the front door. At the end of our driveway, I notice a small white car. Now I've never taken that much notice of the white cars up until this point. And it wasn't uncommon for cars to park in this exact spot for our neighbor. But I just got a sinking feeling in my stomach when I looked at it. I kept walking down the stairs, and as I got close to the bottom, the driver's side door opens, and a man gets out quickly. I keep walking towards the garage, and he starts moving towards our driveway. That was the point when something inside me told me to scream for my parents and run and lock myself in the car. I did exactly that, and this guy who was halfway up my driveway at this point turned around and ran back to his car and drove off. By the time my parents came out, there was no evidence that this had happened, and they didn't believe me. A week later there was a notice in our school newsletter about a man in a white car attempting to take another child from my school at the same night. My parents were very shaken, and took me seriously after reading that. I don't believe he was ever caught, but it definitely taught me to listen to my intuition and take notice of my surroundings. When I was 17, I worked in a large mall at Vans. I had a lot of creepy older guys come in and flirt with me, but one guy took the cake. One day I was working the usual busy as hell Saturday nights, and there were 4 very tall men that asked me for my help getting shoes. I worked at an outlet, so the store was large with tall racks. The mall I worked in was extremely popular amongst locals and tourists alike. The mall has some history for people being taken, and a hotspot for it. So anyway, the men said that they were from Nigeria, and they were pretty chill at first until they began to flirt. One man kept saying he has a son in Nigeria and asked if I wanted to wed him. I laughed because I thought he was joking, but suddenly he looked extremely offended. I was awkward and began talking about shoes, but the man interrupted me. by saying how great his son was and that I would make a great wife. At that point I grew uncomfortable because I didn't want to be rude, so I asked for a coworker to come over and take care of them as I went to the bathroom. Everything was normal for the remainder of my shift. I clocked out and was waiting for my dad to come pick me up. I usually walked around the halls of the mall as I waited. The music was soothing and all was calm. I walked past the restroom hall and saw figures standing in my peripheral. I glanced and saw the 4 men from earlier. I was in full-on panic mode at that point, but played it off. I smiled at them softly and kept walking so they didn't think I was being rude. Sure enough, they began following me. I picked up my pace, hoping to find other people walking around, but there weren't any. I was speed walking, but the guys were keeping pace with me. My thoughts were to just go to the bathroom so that I could lose them, so I entered the next restroom hall. I walked slowly, thinking I had lost them, but soon after I heard pounding footsteps in a hurry. I looked back and they were coming right after me. I didn't think the bathroom was an option anymore, and I started yelling for help. I ran straight to the employee corridor of the mall. Right when I got there through the doors, a security guard met me on the other side. I bumped into him and never felt more relieved in my whole life. The men took off the other way, and the guard let me stay in his office until my dad came. Thank God for that guard. If he wasn't there, I probably even wouldn't be sharing this with you now. As for those guys, let's not meet. I worked at a local pizza joint in my small hometown back in 2016. About 6 months into the job, I had an older man around 70 years old come in. He walked up to the counter and had asked me for a soda. He then sat at a table. A few minutes later, he came back up to the counter and asked what my name was. I told him, as we didn't have name tags. I didn't think anything of it, and he walked back down to the table to sit down. 10 minutes go by and he came back up to the counter and said, "What would you say if I were to ask you on a date?" Immediately I got a bad feeling. I uncomfortably laughed it off and told him no. He then left. A few hours later, I saw him walking back up to the pizza place. I told my co-worker that I was uncomfortable and that I didn't want to serve him. She agreed with me and I hid in the back while she spoke with him. After a few minutes, I came back and she told me what happened. She said he asked for me, and she told him that no one named Courtney works here. And then he said, yes she does, she's 5'3", has purple hair, and she's off on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I'd never seen this guy before, but somehow he knew my work schedule. I immediately called my dad. He's an officer, and I wanted to see what I could do. There wasn't anything I could do but avoid him whenever I was working. I had to let everyone know the situation and how uncomfortable I was. However, when he came in, they forced me to handle him. The next time he came in, he was telling me about his 18-year-old girlfriend in the Philippines. He then went to the restroom and was banging around in there for at least an hour. And then he just left. I would occasionally look out the window to see what was going on outside, and I would see him in his car with a newspaper in front of his face, watching me. Everyone would tell him to leave me alone, and that I was only 18. He didn't care. He would follow me around the grocery store, which was right next to the pizza place. I got used to all of this. Eventually, he put in a job application at the pizza place. I read the resume. In the experience section, there were a few normal things. However, the last few things sent shivers down my spine. He had listed janitorial experience and chainsaw experience. My coworkers and boss thought this was hilarious, so they put it on the wall, and whenever I couldn't perform up to their standards, they said they'd give him a call and give him the job. I soon left after that, so I'm not sure if he continued to try and chat with the other girls. A few months later, I started working at a rescue center. I was talking to a few co-workers and they brought this guy up. The exact same thing happened to one of them at the previous jobs. Some 70-year-old stalker. Creepy. When I was about 7 or 8, we used to live in Webster, Wisconsin. and we lived in a house a little bit wider and longer than a trailer house. No upstairs, just the base floor and basement. It was a beautiful house with a big area that was just woods. One day my cousin was supposed to be watching my 2 sisters and I, and he said we could all go play outside as long as we stayed within his sight. But within 5 minutes he ran into the woods and told us to keep up. Of course we listened to him and ran after him, but soon he disappeared and we couldn't see him nor the house, nor the tree line where the wood stopped. We were well and truly lost and started freaking out and crying. And then about a half hour later, a really tall Native American chief came up behind us and asked us what was wrong and why we were crying and if we're okay and lost. I told him how we were chasing my cousin and we lost him, and we didn't know how to make it back home. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Just come to my village, rest for a little bit, eat some lunch, play with the children, and when you're ready you can explain to me where you live." I said okay, and we go back to his village. It's a smaller one in the middle of the woods in a clearing, but it had at least 60 people. We ate stew, and they had me draw in the dirt, the road, and our house. He smiled and said, "I know exactly where you live. If you want to play for a little bit, that's okay, but I want to get you home before dark. There are a lot of dangers in these woods like bears, coyotes, bobcats, and that's not good for children to be out in." So he took us home, and he didn't leave the edge of the woods. My mom came out crying, asking where we were, saying she was about to call the cops. We had been missing for 4 to 5 hours. She asked us why we left the house without Scotty, my cousin, and I said he ran with us into the woods and we followed him, but then he disappeared. He then came outside and said he had never left the house. He thought we were in our rooms. So I told my mom what happened and she said we'll figure it out tomorrow. The next day we went and followed our footprints and found the village. Or what used to be the village. There was almost nothing there. What had been a gorgeous place was now ash. It had all been burned down to the grass, which was shorter the day before than it stood today. It was taller than me, and it looked like it was burned down and left vacant for hundreds of years. We called out to them with no response. We found the chief's headdress and a doll made of deer hide and some other kind of cloth as we were about to head back. And then I found a huge eagle feather the size of my arm. And that was the most amazing and spooky encounter I've ever had. This happened to my roommate and I 2 years ago, when we drove into the national forest just outside of the town we live in. We go to this small college in New England about 3 hours from any major city. For context, this forest has quite a few urban legends surrounding it, and the local community, although they do go there often, have a lot of superstition about how to be safe while there. I had just broken up with my partner, and my roommate could sense I was feeling down. Finals were just around the corner, so she decided to help me get my mind off things, and suggested we go to a nice spot she found last week, and just chill and de-stress. We took a couple of beers with us and drove up to this secluded spot in the forest. From the moment we left the main asphalt road in the forest, I saw a couple of things that unsettled me. You could see the abandoned houses of a ghost town from the higher ground the road was on, and we saw this old doll hanging from a rope on a tree. Creepy stuff. We didn't give it a second thought and just kept on driving. We got to a clearing and parked our cars behind some trees, popped open the back of our SUV, and started just talking and playing music. About 10 minutes later, 2 cars appeared from the road and parked in the clearing. My friend didn't pay them any attention. Instead, she kept talking, but as I was facing them from where I was sat, I couldn't stop seeing what they did. A guy popped out of each car, talked for a few minutes, and then I saw them take out a long object covered in a dark plastic bag from the back of one of their cars. This is when I noticed that these guys were armed, and not like shotguns, which I see often in this town, but handguns, and they started lighting the bag on fire. I told my friend to get down, She turned around and saw them for the first time. Black smoke was rising from the bag, and between trying to keep my head down and steal glances at them, I saw one of them take out a second object, and I heard them shoot it right before they set it on fire. I don't know how long my friend and I were lying there in silence, but it was definitely enough to let the terror sink in and whisper to each other how much we loved each other in case this was what we thought it was. At some point I looked up and saw they were pointing at our car and saw them walking into the woods, maybe trying to follow our tracks or trying to look for us. All I know is that right then and there I told my friend to jump into the driver's seat and make a run for it. I shut the back door, and between that and the car starting up, the guys heard it and started running towards us, then ran towards one of their cars and hopped in. We went over a hill and driving way above what was safe for dirt roads on a hillside, but we managed to lose them. We drove to a neighboring town and roamed around for a while, just to make sure no one was following us before we went back to our dorm. That day we tried to make fun of the whole situation and got really drunk, before finally breaking down and crying from knowing we had seen something we weren't supposed to. We were at first terrified of telling anyone, but eventually did tell officers on campus who contacted the police. But they never found anything. Before I start the story, there are a few things you need to know. I am an artist, and I've always been very in my own world. Almost as if I were always thinking of a story or character or picture I wanted to draw. I'd walk into wars, forget anything, anywhere, and place items in the strangest of places while I was thinking. To give you an idea to the extent of this, my first place to look for anything I've lost is the fridge or freezer. I found remotes, my cell phone, art equipment, anything really inside there. Second, I've always had a very negative view when it comes to alcohol or any other narcotics. I don't mean to shame anyone if you're hearing this, but it was always something that I generally regarded as pointless. However, if you find enjoyment in it, all the better to you. Third, I am an asexual person. I never desire it or have any interest in finding a mate, so flirting usually flies over my head. And finally, due to my childhood, I have a mild case of anxiety disorder, which has lately been worse due to this event and escalated by others. So now that you have a good understanding about me, let's begin. This particular story begins when I graduated from an upper secondary school for visual arts. Upper secondary is the type of high school there is in Scandinavia. I had a decent enough grade, my best being biology and English, and art, of course. I immediately looked for work after graduation, since I had graduated half a year late due to some health issues and the entrance exam for universities were already done. So, by the time I graduated, I had around a year and a half before I even had the possibility of applying for uni. I also sent hundreds of applications to any place that would take me, and hardly even got invited for an interview. This all took its toll on me. The constant rejection triggered depression, and I'd hardly leave the house, and I stopped taking care of myself altogether. I wouldn't shower, put on makeup, brush my teeth, anything. I'd avoid mirrors and felt as though I was a complete and utter failure, which was not made better by my parents who pressured me with, "How many applications did you send today?" Or, "You really need to get this job so you can start saving to move out." This might sound mean, but they don't mean it in a bad way, since I'd expressed the need to get my own flat for the past few years. Not to mention my relationship with my parents at the time was very strained, and my depression made me very irritable and angry, so I can't really blame them for pushing me to get out of the house. This continued for around half a year until I finally got a job in a supermarket about 8 miles away from where I lived. Life really picked up from there. I started to take care of myself once again. The people I worked with were all very nice and I had no issues with anyone, though they were very normal, so I'd get invited to get-togethers or have a pint after work. I always made an excuse why I couldn't go and would play MMOs or something instead at home. This might sound sad, but I enjoyed myself more like that. Fast forward a year of working and I was accepted into my #1 choice of university. And due to this, I cut my work hours to half. I was only at work 2 to 3 nights a week. This particular supermarket chain I worked at had a yearly festival week gimmick to boost sales, and this year we were handing out scratch cards at the checkout. Apparently the chain had a contest with every location, and the winning supermarket would be given an €1,000 cash prize for employee refreshment purposes, i.e. booze. Our supermarket decided we'd take everyone out for a night of drinking in a hotel/resort area connected to the shopping mall for our workers with the money. No surprise there, and since I had grown to be close friends with many of the other employees, it was motivation for us to win. Even if I didn't enjoy going out, everyone in the department was so excited for it, it was kind of infectious. Long story short, we won, and we went drinking. Our boss was ecstatic with how well we did, and how motivated we were. He even opened us a tab in the first bar we went to, so I had quite a bit to drink. When the first bar shut, we went with our own money to continue to a nearby nightclub. I hardly remember anything else, other than I drank like a sailor and sang karaoke horribly. We stayed until closing time, and I made my way to the train station to catch the last train home. On my way, I was stopped by a man with a thick accent, who asked if he could walk me home. I laughed and just said, "No worries." I was literally a few steps away, and motioned towards the station. He then apologized and said he thought I lived in the student buildings nearby and went on his way. I thought it was quite an endearing way to ask someone out, and thought nothing more of it. Another year passed by, and I was now living alone in a student block not far away from my parents' house. The area I moved to was very poor, since it consisted of only students, so in a weird way I actually felt very safe living there. The walls were as thin as paper, so everyone else could hear if anything happened to me, or if anyone tried to break into my home. Granted, I got an email from the company that funded the cheap student blocks that the bike seller in your address was broken into, but I never kept anything in there, so it didn't faze me. Sometimes I'd even forget the keys on the lock in the front door, and would wake up in the morning to a neighbor ringing my doorbell and handing me the keys with a joking, "Nothing to steal, eh?" There was also a very convenient bus that stopped right outside my door that I could take for both school and work, though I needed another bus to get all the way to work. One Saturday, after a 9-hour shift at work, looking and feeling like a total zombie, I was making my way to the bus stop through an underpass late at night, when I heard someone call out to me through my earphones. I always stopped if I heard someone call out to me when I was near work, since it was usually a colleague offering a lift, or a regular customer wanting to crack a joke, or one of the guys from GameStop upstairs wanting to talk to me about Skyrim or something. I was basically friends with nearly every employee in the mall at this point, so someone stopping me late at night in a sketchy parking lot or an underpass was relatively common. I didn't recognize the man, but then again, I handled around 600 customers every day, so I hardly ever did. I also was conditioned to flash a bright smile through years of customer service whenever I met anyone's eyes, even outside work. I'm sure the ones who've worked in customer service jobs for long enough can relate to this. The man spoke hurriedly in a thick accent about how he was in love with me and how he had been watching me. It was very hard to make sense of anything he was saying. He spoke almost like it was a stream of consciousness. What I did make out was that he had seen me in a bar, which he named, and ever since he had been watching me, and never before found the courage to talk to me before now. I was unsettled by the choice of words, but chuckled to him, not being a native speaker. I listened to him while I nervously eyed the underpass, feeling glad that there were a few people walking through it during this whole spiel. After he quieted down, I just awkwardly said, "Okay, thanks, but I need to go or I'm gonna miss my bus," and turned to continue on, when he grabbed me and pushed me towards the wall of the underpass. I was around 30 centimeters taller than him, but he had a lot of mass over me, since the most sport I had ever done was acrobatics and ballet, and I'd quit even that many years before. I considered punching him or screaming, but I felt it better not to escalate the situation, so I sternly told him to let me go and that I needed to get to the station. He pleaded for me to give him a chance and said that he wouldn't let me go before I did. I was racking my brain about the safest way out of this situation, so I tentatively told him, "What if I save your number? and I'll see if I call you. I had used this on another persistent suitor before and it had worked just fine. Now I wish I'd never said those words. The man's face lit up and he started to spell out his name. He was from somewhere in the Middle East. While I pulled out my phone and hammered his name and number into my phone, sighing in relief, I was almost back at my house. He suddenly grabbed my hand and tore my phone from it. At this point I angrily screamed, "What are you doing? Give it back!" But to my horror, everyone had moved from the underpass and I was alone with the creeper. He ignored me, struggling and screaming completely, and calmly just called his own phone number from it, before handing it back to me, as if what he just did was completely normal. I stared at him, terrified and dumbfounded. Then he hugged me tight, cupping a feel and tried to kiss me. I hurriedly blocked his mouth with my hand and forcibly pushed him away. I didn't say anything anymore. I just ran out of the underpass and he didn't try to stop me. When I was safely at home, I blocked his number first, then deleted it, thinking any deity possible that when I moved out and got a new phone, my father had insisted on an unlisted one, so he couldn't find my address out by Google. I asked my manager to not give me the Saturday night shift for a while and explained the issue I had with her. I also asked her if he could be banned from the store or something, but she told me that she couldn't do anything before I filed a restraining order. Obviously, I had no idea what the man's name or number was anymore. Not to mention, getting a restraining order on him based on what I had as evidence was very unlikely. A few weeks went by, and he showed up when I was at work without fail, as if he knew my shift, even though I had a different shift every week. He would just stare at me from outside the shop, or buy a single lollipop or something else, something cheap, multiple times a day, paying with cash, so that I had to extend my hand out to him, which he always took and held for as long as possible if there was no other customers there. The horrible thing about this was that it was not unusual to get a creepy customer every so often. Every now and then you'd get them if you worked as a cashier. Mentally ill or just socially inept, desperate people mistake customer service as genuine interest, painfully often. And you hardly paid any more attention to it than the other customers, since nearly always it's a short-term kind of thing and harmless. The man could have been stalking me for God knows how long, and I don't think I would have noticed. The thought that I only noticed this now that I'd had the earlier encounter with him, was enough for me to lose sleep over, and getting recurring sleep paralysis nightmares of someone entering my room and breathing heavily in my ear as a result. This went on, and it was now a few days until I had 8 weeks off work for summer vacation, which I had requested, half paid, half unpaid. The thought of not having to go to work and face the man every day was enough to cheer me up, so I threw myself into an extracurricular school project, a game for a museum exhibit. One day I had stayed at school working on a 2D rig for said project until school was closing and the janitor ushered me out of the classroom. I had a little while before my bus was due to arrive at the stop, so I decided to catch some fresh air after working nearly 12 hours on the computer and walked to the nearby station that was at the end of the line. The bus was already waiting, so I rushed in, and after I paid the fee, I faced the back of the bus and my stomach turned. There he was, with 3 friends, the guy in a thick accent. My stalker. We were the only passengers. I contemplated exiting the bus, but the next one wouldn't be for at least an hour, so against all common sense I decided to stay on. I sat at the very front of the bus hoping he wouldn't notice me, but as soon as the bus left the station he moved to sit next to me, and his friends moved to sit beside me, as if he knew this was the line I usually took, and just waited so that I couldn't exit the bus. I was ready to throw up, so I turned the music in my ears so loud it hurt. I ignored every tap and shoulder grab. I clenched my laptop back on my lap, ready to sacrifice my computer and smack him in the face with it if he tried to do anything else. Then the realization hit me. This line stopped literally on the front door of my building. My name was plastered on the front door of it. He would know where I lived. I felt as though I could burst into a howling cry at any minute. My thoughts were going a mile a minute, considering everything that could happen to me if I didn't have a way to get out of this situation. I knew there was a longer stop coming up later, so I decided to try and make my break there. When the stop rolled around, music still breaking my eardrums, heart pounding, I said, "Sorry, I need to get off," and made my way to the mid-doors. All 4 men followed me, speaking fast in what I assume is Hebrew. When the door opened, I stepped out and walked for a while, before suddenly turning back and running like I was possessed, back into the bus and yelling at the driver, "Please drive, just drive!" The driver looked taken aback, looked at the men who were running towards the bus and back at my face, twisted into loud sobs and how I was shaking, and decided I was serious. He closed the doors and sped off. He stopped the bus at a garage a few miles away and asked if he could do anything, like call the cops. I just kept crying and retold my first encounter to him, when something in my head clicked. The bar. He had specifically named it. It was the nightclub we went to continue our drinks over a year ago when we won that contest. I had never been after I had visited that time. He said he saw me there. He had been tailing me for over a year. That night, he was the one who offered to walk me home. That's why he showed up at my work without fail whenever I was working. I sobbed, howled like a damned tortured cat, and the driver told me to go lie down in the back and that he'd drive me home. I told him it was the last stop. The driver dropped me off safely home before he continued his round, risking his job for my safety. I couldn't thank him enough. I didn't even know his name. After the second incident, I called in work sick until my vacation and cut my hair and dyed it black. I also spent the vacation biking around my hometown during the day, not venturing to the town my work and school were at for the whole 2 months. I occasionally still sometimes have those sleep paralysis nightmares, but very fortunately, I never saw him again. A small part of me thinks it's because he doesn't want me to. One thing's for sure though, I never left my keys in my lock again. So to the creepy man with the thick accent, I implore you, never come looking for me again. About a year ago, I decided to make an impromptu journey to Poland in search of relatives I'd never met, but had only heard of via my ancestry research and an American cousin who reached out to me. As a lover of travel and languages, I was eager to go alone and see how I'd do. I learned some Polish in college and have been traveling worldwide since I was 21. Before going to the rural southeast of Poland, I made the most of the trip by first exploring Krakow, an amazing city, with buses and trains being the prominent mode of intercity transport. I lugged my suitcase the 40 minutes to the vast station to buy me a bus ticket to the next stop, ancestral homeland. Now, being a country girl growing up, I am still learning how to be adept at public transport and maneuvering people in streets. I'm also shy and not great at social skills, but normally that doesn't stop me. The main bus/train station at Krakow is also a large fancy mall, and I was delighted to find McCafe with free Wi-Fi. My phone service does not extend to Europe, so that's all the contact I had. I settled in and messaged a friend back home to my whereabouts. The McCafe had the aura of a Starbucks, but the cheap prices of McDonald's. Another plus. It was relatively busy and open to the public view where I was sitting, at a one-person booth next to an outlet to charge my phone before the long journey. However, my sanctity was not to last. After a short time, an older, gruff-looking gentleman with a thick, tattered winter coat sauntered in and immediately headed my way. He seemed to be in some kind of construction work, as his coat was very warmly padded and dirty, with the characteristic reflective yellow and orange colors. It did strike me as a bit strange, since this station/mall was more travelers and shoppers than blue-collar workers. As for him heading my way, I figured with the laptop he held out ahead of him that he was just looking for a plug, as I had been. Of course, mine was not the only outlet amid the moderately spacious cafe, but he chose to sit directly next to me, almost touching shoulders, and plugged into the second of 2 plugs I was using. Sometimes people don't have a sense of personal space. I guess this outlet was the closest to the entrance. I shook it off, and he proceeded to speak to me and gesture at his laptop. I got the sense that he needed some sort of technical assistance from me, a youth, and figured that would explain why he sat next to me. I helped him set up the laptop on his Wi-Fi in broken Polish, and he thanked me by kissing my hand emphatically and smiling like he'd won the lottery. I noticed an icon at the bottom of his screen showing he had a Ukrainian keyboard equipped, and it was confirmed with what I heard earlier of his accent. He kept looking my way even though he no longer needed assistance, and I pretended to be busy on my phone even though my friend on the other end wasn't necessarily responding quickly. I didn't really want him to talk to me. He kept his laptop slightly turned my way intentionally, as if he wanted me to see what he was doing. He opened up Facebook and started a FaceTime call with a woman around his age or perhaps a little younger, and pointed the camera towards me to show her and said something I couldn't understand that well. I assumed he was telling her how I'd helped him out, but their conversation seemed strained, and she made a forced smile at me briefly before they began talking loudly at each other again. I tried to mind my own business, but it was awkward being in view of his FaceTime call and it being so loud that others in the cafe looked over at him. The call ended soon thereafter, and I thought he would leave, but instead, he closed his laptop and proceeded to question me. I tried my best to answer in broken Polish mixed with English, and he seemed to understand well enough. He was amicable, although dramatic, and every time I finally understood something he said and answered him satisfactorily, he would laugh and kiss my hand and not relinquish it. Now, before venturing to Poland, my cousin had warned me that the rural old-fashioned men may kiss a lady's hand in greeting. With this in the back of my mind, I wasn't sure if he was in the realm of cultural normality for the region or if it was too much. Being the socially awkward person that I am, I decided to let it go, especially considering I'd been traveling alone for 2 weeks at that point. I supposed some human-to-human interaction would not be totally unwelcome. However, his questions, despite the friendly smile he posed them with, were increasingly invasive, since he seemed, again, to not be one for respecting personal space. I chalked it up to him being too friendly, but innocent enough. He asked why I was here, and where I was from, and going to, what my phone number was, and if I needed something later in my travels, that he could return the favor I gave to him. That one sent me off. Even if he's ignorant to social norms and space, that one was odd even for an old-fashioned man. I didn't mind obliging him though, because my number would be useless in Europe anyway, and gave him an alias instead of the real name. During this conversation, he kept saying I didn't need to leave for the bus yet, and it morphed later into, I needn't go on the bus at all, I could stay a while with his family. He insisted that he would repay me for my help. All I did was click McCafe free Wi-Fi and accept the terms. It didn't seem like too much to warrant this much gratitude, but who knows with boomers. I mean, he managed to use FaceTime just fine. My thoughts were fluttering around in my head, and I kept declining and said my family would be waiting for me. A lie, we'd never met, and they didn't even know of my existence yet. But he said for me to just tell them I'd come later, and to stay with him and his family instead. He also insisted on buying me a coffee, even though I hadn't finished the one I bought myself, and caused a fuss when I kept saying no. Mind you, this whole time he was still leaning towards me and holding onto my hand tightly. I was getting sweaty. Because of it, it was hard for me to try and collect my things and leave, or even shoot a message to my friend. What do I do? He called to the cashier at the counter, and about 10 feet away, asked for him to bring me a coffee. The cashier replied that the man may walk up to the register and place his order, but he refused twice. His friendly demeanor when speaking to me was gone, as he nearly yelled at the cashier to meet his demands and threw the cash onto the table for him. The man turned back to me and was smiley again and insisted I stay to drink the coffee with him and chat. He knew where my bus was leaving and where it was going. He knew because he'd looked over my shoulder at my ticket when it was resting on the table next to my phone. I had it out to memorize the pickup location and time, and again, my hand held hostage in his, I didn't have a chance to move the ticket out of sight. He was blatantly stalling me and still insisting on me going to see him and his family. I finally got upset, not wanting to miss the bus and waste my money on that ticket. Plus, I had a ride waiting for me, expecting my arrival at that particular time, and in my limited Polish, I told him just so. The people pleaser in me was torn, but ultimately the hostess who would be awaiting me had won out over the man glued to my side. Somehow he finally let up and nodded sadly when I said I must leave now. I gulped the burning hot coffee he bought just for show and not look ungrateful or wasteful and thanked him for buying it for me. He refused my thanks profusely and insisted he owed it to me, and he still had a hold of my hand. He kissed it again and again, holding it like lowly servants do in the cartoons to the lovely princess they're indebted to. I put up with it once more with the hope that it would soon be over. He pulled me closer as he did this and reached down my shoulders like he wanted a hug goodbye, and I put up with this too, despite all his rude insistence. It still felt like he was overly friendly, perhaps lonely, and felt bad just walking away. His sudden jerk of my arm, closer to him, slid me along the booth, closer to him, and he hugged me tightly. He kissed my cheek. Ugh. But when I thought he was letting go, he grabbed my face, forcefully with both his hands, and turned it into his, and he kissed me on the lips twice, desirously, as if he were a Casanova movie star and I his femme fatale. It was disgusting, and he did it in full view of the other customers sitting across the way. They'd thrown awkward glances our way throughout the entire encounter, since we were the only ones talking and laughing in the cafe. They especially had noticed his loud demands to the cashier. I was in too much shock to notice if they'd seen the last part, and I honestly didn't care. I had 5 minutes to reach the bus amid a huge bustling station that I'd never been to before. As soon as the stupid old man let go, I made an obligatory forced half smile and a goodbye, and escaped on shaky legs into the crowded walkway. I knew I'd missed the bus, but I had to leave the cafe anyway to escape. The next bus wasn't for 6 more hours, and the man was probably still there just inside the mall area, and I didn't want him to spot me again. I waited at a different fast food place, closest to the buses, and in sight of a police officer standing at the mall entrance just in case I saw him once more. Being in a different time zone from my family and friends, I felt I had no one to comfort me, and made the mistake of frantically posting on Reddit in another sub. I got yelled at by security for resting my shaking feet of the bar on the chair beside me, and broke into tears. I only told my one night owl friend from earlier when she came online later, and as I didn't want to worry my parents or boyfriend about me traveling alone. To this day, they don't know what happened. Who knows what he was really up to? Or maybe he really did want me to meet his family. I'll never know. I felt so gross and disgusting physically that I covered my mouth and tongue with hand sanitizer that I had on me. This was in February 2020, but coronavirus had yet to be confirmed in Poland. Mentally and emotionally, I was exhausted and distraught, of course, because I mostly felt stupid for letting things get that far. So scruffy old man, let's never meet again. This happened around October, so not too long ago, and it's undoubtedly one of the most terrifying things that has ever happened in my life. To give you some background info, I live in a rather secluded home with my 21-year-old half-sister Cindy, since neither of us have parents. Anyway, we literally have 20 outdoor cats freely roaming the property. Except Jasper, Cindy's big Maine Coon tabby, who she spoils the heck out of, and probably loved more than most people. Honestly, I can't say I blamed her for that. Jasper loved to cuddle, was friendly to everyone, and he usually would greet us outside when I came home from school. As far as cats come, Jasper sure was one of a kind. This will be relevant for a little later. Due to a severe outbreak of COVID in my area, my school forced us to transfer to virtual learning until further notice, unlike a lot of other kids. I don't mind online learning because of this. My connection is so bad I can't even access Google Meets. I get out of participating in the live stream and simply just do my homework. So anyway, when Cindy found out we were switching to online, she immediately told me that she wanted me to go to work with her and I could do my schoolwork there. When I ask her why she wanted me to go with her, she proceeds to tell me that she doesn't feel safe with me being here home alone all day. This baffled me, because during the summer, I was left home alone the entire freaking day while she was at work. It was never a problem. I was a bit suspicious, but decided it was best to not pitch up an argument. Maybe she was just lonely and didn't want to admit it. So that was that. My sister works 3 different jobs depending on the shifts she picks up, and the last job of the day is either the dealership or the local Japanese restaurant. So I had to sit in a booth or a chair somewhere in the corner doing my homework while my sister went on her own doing her little tasks. It sucked, yes, and I was still inwardly fuming at the fact why I couldn't have just done all this at home, and I eventually found that out. I was sitting in a booth with my MacBook finishing up an assignment that I had been procrastinating on when a guy walked through the front entrance. He, at first, appeared to be a pretty normal dude, so I initially didn't pay much mind to him. But when he sat down at the bar and kept trying to talk to my sister, who blatantly showed little interest in speaking to him, was when I couldn't tear my attention away. As I mentioned prior, my sister is 21, and I couldn't really tell because half of his face was obscured by a mask, but this dude had to be at least in his 30s, so it's no surprise she wasn't interested. But as this continued to escalate, I literally had to plug my nose in order to suppress my laughter. Could this guy seriously not take a hint? I felt a twinge of sympathy for my sister, though it's never fun dealing with some douchebag who's relentless. Finally, when Cindy's shift ended, she seemed happier than ever to get the hell out of there. Being the younger sister, of course, I teased her about it and said something along the lines of, "So, who's the guy you were talking to?" And she literally cringed as though she was caused physical pain. Cindy went on to tell me that the guy had been coming to visit her at work for some time. He had introduced himself as Chandler and claimed that he lived relatively close to us. My sister was dubious about that though, because the only person that lives near us is our neighbor Doris, a woman in her 60s. After that, we headed back home, but what she said had only brought more questions to the forefront. Why did Cindy want me to go to work with her? Was she scared of the guy coming to our house and doing something to me while she was away? The thoughts sent chills skittering down my spine. As we were driving back to the house, I ventured to ask Cindy what exactly this guy knows about her, and she said the only information she gave out was her first name and how old she was, and that she had a younger sister and stuff about the cats, but had never given him so much as a hint as where we lived. And I have to admit, it made me feel quite queasy. But perhaps could have just been a neighbor we'd never met. I haven't even lived with my sister for a year at that point, and she hasn't even lived in the area for that long either, so I just dropped the subject. However, as the days went on, and I had to spend my school days at my sister's work, this dude occasionally showed up to hit on her. And the creepy thing was, this dude knew every place she worked, which I was absolutely disturbed by, unless, which I doubt, Cindy had told her exact schedule and all the places she worked. I suggested to Cindy that maybe she should call the cops, but I couldn't imagine what help they could do, considering that the creeper hadn't broken any laws yet. He was just being a creep. Cindy concluded the same thing, and said that maybe, if she continues not showing any interest, he'd finally get the hint and leave her alone. I then asked her the reason she wanted me coming to work, and she admitted that it was because of this guy. I felt like a jerk for being so annoyed about it in the past. If I was scared on her behalf, I couldn't imagine how uncomfortable she must have felt. Unfortunately, the guy never seemed to get the damn hint and continued to pull stuff on Cindy. On an unbusy day at the Japanese restaurant, the infamous dude dragged his stump ass into the building and jumped into his casual business of pestering my sister. And about the 1300th time of politely turning him down, Cindy finally snapped and made a huge scene of going absolutely crazy on the guy, shouting at him that she was not interested and to just leave her alone and to never bother her again. Humiliated, the dude slipped out of the restaurant, leaving my sister seething in his wake. And if I'm being honest, I've never seen my sister go off like that on anyone, not even my misbehaving ass. Cindy began to full out slobber into her co-worker's shoulder after that, and everyone there was wondering what the hell happened. I couldn't blame them. I just really hoped the dude was done with this creepy shenanigan stuff. But boy was I wrong. After everything went down, he stopped coming to my sister's work and seemed to quit bothering her altogether. She thought her outburst was what finally did the trick, and we wouldn't have to deal with the freak anymore. But she still wanted me coming to work just to be safe. And, if I'm going to be truthful, I was actually okay with that. Strangely, as the creepless week progressed, something was going on with Jasper. He was throwing up and having some sort of diarrhea, and just seemed overall too exhausted to move. Cindy, of course, was extremely worried and stated that the poor cat must have gotten into poison or ate something weird outside. She scheduled an appointment to take Jasper to the vet, but unfortunately, Jasper had passed away before then. And to say the least, Cindy was absolutely heartbroken. She really loved that cat, and losing an important pet can sometimes hurt as much as losing another person. I went through the same situation in my former home with an animal I was close to. After several dismissal hours of my sister wailing like a toddler and clutching her cat to her chest, she told me that we were going to bury Jasper out back. Cindy had kind of a pet cemetery at the edge of our yard, which was visible from the window. I helped her bury Jasper and made a little headstone to place on his grave, and after that, I heaved up an attempt to comfort her by making some tea and putting on the office, but she still couldn't stop crying. Later that night, at around 1 a.m., I was in the middle of FaceTiming my friend when this faint digging sound emitted outside my window. I shut up instantaneously and began listening, and made sure what I was hearing was real, and it was. Someone was outside at 1 in the morning digging a hole in our yard. Keep in mind, this is private property. What the hell? I muttered. She kept asking what was going on, and I responded saying that I'd be right back and hung up. With my stomach in knots, I crawled across my bed over to my window. Could it have been Cindy? I hesitantly peeked through the shades and my heart leapt into my throat with what I saw. Provided by the moonlight, I was able to scope out a silhouetted figure in the middle of the pet cemetery, digging in what appeared to be Jasper's grave. What the hell? This definitely was not Cindy. I couldn't make out any of their features, but the telltale oversized trench coat that they were wearing appeared to be giving me everything I needed to know. The bile in my stomach curdled with nausea. It couldn't have been the creep. What the hell was he doing in our pet cemetery at this time of night? What was going on? I couldn't unglue my eyes from the macabre scene, watching as the creep finally tossed aside the shovel and reached into the hole, pulling out Jasper's giant form. I absolutely hate to relive this moment, but he began to do unspeakable things to the cat corpse, things that no teenager or anyone should ever have to witness. My mouth dropped open in horror. Distraught, I finally tore my gaze away and released the scream locked in my chest and began to cry, darting to Cindy's room at wind speed. I practically ripped the door off its hinges, shrieking and sobbing at my sister to get up and get the hell out of there, and that there was someone doing stuff to our dead cat. I had to re-explain the situation at least 3 times before Cindy could understand what I was screaming about. When she did, She didn't even bother looking outside and just dialed 911. The cops took so long to arrive, and the creep had probably the sense to flee due to the cacophony of sound going on inside. When they searched the property, I remember cracking some joke like, "I wonder what Stephen King would think of this version of Pet Sematary," which Cindy did not find amusing. Unsurprisingly, the guy was nowhere to be found, and neither was Jasper's corpse, so that sick guy actually took the cat with him and would continue to do God knows what to it, unless the freak had been watching us bury him. I didn't know how he knew the precise spot to dig. Cindy was so upset that she started crying, and I can't say I was in much of a better condition. The cops eventually left, and there wasn't anything left to do besides fall back into an uneasy sleep. I was so disturbed that night that I ended up staying in my sister's room, and maybe got 2 hours of sleep at most, since the sickening image had been seared into my brain. The next day, however, I heard Cindy shriek from the other room. I ran out as fast as I could, demanding to know what happened and if everything was alright, and she handed me a splotchy slip of paper, and said she found it taped to the front door, and it read something along the lines of, "I couldn't have you, so I had to have what was closest to you. See." So because Cindy rejected this creep, he seriously snaked onto our property while we were away, poisoned her cat, an innocent unsuspecting animal, and ultimately ended up stealing the poor thing's corpse to do things to. Now, I've met some messed up people in my life, but this seriously tops the list. After she read it over again, Cindy promptly ripped up the paper and tossed it into our fireplace in disgust. I snapped at her, saying we should have turned it in as evidence, but she shook her head. Thankfully, we haven't seen or heard from him since then, and I really hope it stays that way. Eventually, my sister allowed me to start staying home alone again if I promised to keep all the doors locked and call her immediately if anything else weird went on. To the creep, you're a sicko, and I hope one day you come to your senses and get the help you so very desperately need. I don't know what you planned on doing with Jasper, but I hope you never bother my sister or any of her cats again. I saw a shadow person walk through my kitchen, and at the time didn't take it too seriously. I was freaked out, but reasoned it away, and thought I was seeing things and kind of forgot about it. About a month later, my friend visiting also saw it, and described it to me exactly in the same place as my kitchen, same height, body shape. It really freaked us out. A few other house guests saw him over the course of my stay in that apartment, in which many other unexplainable things happened. The one thing that stands out, though, is the story with the keys. I lived in this apartment for 2 years while I finished my undergrad, and I often went home to see family. On one trip, I told my dear friend John he could feel free to use my house, stay there, or just watch TV to get away from his controlling family that he still lived with. I gave him my keys and asked him to be sure not to lose them, as I had already lost the spares. So he and 3 of our good friends go up there for the weekend to my house. The first day they get there, John asked the group to help him remember to get the keys and lock up after they were done having movie night. They all said they saw him put the keys in the center of the dining room table, and they commenced having fun. A few hours later, they're heading out, and John goes to grab the keys, but they are not on the table anymore. He freaks out because he had been so sure to say to everyone, and everyone saw him put them there. Then it became a key hunting party, and everyone starts looking everywhere. Did they fall on the floor? Did they fall behind the couch? They looked everywhere. 2 hours later, John is in near tears, and everyone is freaked out. Now, none of these people except one, Sarah, knew my apartment had strange things going on. She later told me she could feel a strange energy in the house after the keys went missing, like a tingly feeling of anticipation. She didn't want to scare John, as she was already feeling guilty for maybe losing my keys, so she didn't mention any of this until I got back. So it's almost hour 3, and all 4 of them are gathered in the front room around the corner from the dining room, and talking about what to do. I think they were right about to call me. That's when the whole group hears a distinct clank in the other room, and they all jump a bit. John goes running around the corner, and the keys are just there, where he left them, in the middle of the table. Now, John doesn't believe in anything supernatural. He always made fun of me for being into witchcraft and ghosts, and Sarah told me he went all white, which was massively impressive for a very tanned Chinese guy, and ran out the door. Everyone else walked out after him, and quickly they locked the door. When I got home, the house was a bit disheveled, but everything was as it should have been. John, nearly in tears, described what happened. At first, I thought they were all joking, but all 4 of them had the same story, and they aren't very big jokesters. Sarah told me that she would not be coming to my house anymore, and I think this was like the 4th strange thing she'd seen at my house, and it was by far the most intense. I kind of just had to shrug, because I had to keep living there, and if I freak out, well, where would I go? It always seemed like the strange happenings in my apartment affected guests and others more than me. I'm also not scared by stuff like that, and in fact think it's interesting and cool, so maybe that's why they didn't mess with me a ton, but still a little. Either way, that apartment was a lot of my friends' firsts and only brush with the paranormal. While for me it was more like observing a science experiment. Sometimes I miss it, but I don't miss waking up to shadow people standing in my doorway at 3 in the morning, or having friends that go to sleep in my backyard in the middle of the night because they're too scared of my little 2-bedroom apartment. Good old apartment number 7. I moved a lot growing up. By the time freshman year of high school came around, I had moved 7 or so times, and was about a year and a half into my most recent move. I had found a pretty close group of friends in middle school, and we all went to high school together. I met him through one of those close friends. They were in a band together, and even though he was almost 4 years older than us, we welcomed him into our group. Sam was easily twice my size, tall and heavy-set, and originally kind of intimidating, although I was never afraid of large men before him. Lesson learned. I kind of had a bad home life, and I spent as much time as I could at school, sometimes hanging around the school campus until 6 or 7 at night with this friend group. 3 of us lived in the same direction, and we would walk the half-hour trip together until our paths split. One slightly colder evening, Sam offered to walk me home since the others had already left. I just thought he was being a gentleman. He mentioned something from a previous move where he lived in California, where he didn't walk a friend home and something horrible happened. He left it at that, and I let him walk me home. We got a lot closer after that, and bonded over both living in California, and exchanged numbers. He would message me late into the night about his depression and self-harm, and I just wanted to help. A few months later, he tried asking me out. This was a big romantic gesture. He learned a Disney song on the ukulele and sang it to me in the cafeteria, but I was already dating someone, and when I turned him down, he got angry, and freaky, and quiet, twitchy kind of angry. So I felt bad. I started seeing him everywhere. We were still friends, we still hung out in our groups, but I would pass him on the streets, walking somewhere, and a few minutes later, I'd see that he had changed direction and start following me. He would walk me to classes by following me and passing periods at distance. I started to minimize the group time we spent together, and he would follow me more and more. I had friends meet me at each class and walk me to my next one because I was starting to feel unsafe, and he knew where I lived. Then he started to talk, not to me, but to a mutual friend about the one girl in California who he tried to walk home. At first, she just shared my name, some crazy coincidence. Then, she had the same brown curly hair and blue eyes. and every time he rambled about her, she became more and more like me. And then he said what happened. Over literal weeks, this fantasy evolved. They were walking home, and they were jumped by some guy with a knife. It was a robbery gone wrong on her birthday, January 24th, which happened to be mine as well. She died horribly, and he couldn't react in time. She bled out in his arms. Sarah, who has brown, curly hair with blue eyes, shares my name, my birthday, and sounds just like me, bled out in his arms. Each retelling added more and more detail, and this guy, with his sick fantasy about my death, would follow me around and knew where I lived. My boyfriend was abusive, mentally and physically, but I stayed as close to him as I could whenever I could, because if the worst happened, I knew for sure he could throw a punch. I never felt safe at school or in a little town, especially when walking home from school in the dark. One day at school he had a breakdown, freaked out, and ran out of the school in a panic. I was sent after him and found him curled up on the floor. I got closer. I knew about his anxiety and depression, and my safety aside, I wanted to make sure he was okay. It was then that he told me this horrifying story that I had been hearing from mutual friends with added detail. We had been walking home from a concert in California. We passed a dark alley, and a homeless man came out with a rusty knife and asked for anything valuable. I fumbled for my phone but didn't have anything else on me, and he thought I was calling the cops. He stabbed me once, twice, again and again, and Sam stood there horrified. He saw red and grabbed a broken glass bottle near my body and attacked the homeless man and killed him with his own knife. He told me he killed someone. My stalker killed someone. It didn't matter how messed up he was anymore. I didn't care if it was a fantasy or real. I didn't care how it would affect his mental health anymore. I wanted to go to the police. I was scared for my life. My friends convinced me to go to the school counselor first. That morning we went and told them everything. The stalking, the stories, how he admitted to murder. And that was the reason they moved from California. How I was afraid for my life and wanted to call the police. The counselor didn't take us seriously. She went to the principal, and the principal, not a mental health expert, called Sam in to talk about the accusation. The principal then informed me that he did not think that Sam had any kind of mental illness or that I was in any danger, and that was that. I lost faith in adults, gave up on going to the police, and stayed with my friends, walking me in between classes, hiding behind my abusive boyfriend. I looked behind me every step of my walk home that year. The counselors ended up gaslighting us to the point where this all feels like a fever dream now, and I think I would have made it up were it not for my journal entries recording the events of my growing panic and the similar stories from my friend group. And just to clarify, I don't think anyone died in California. I think he's a pathological liar, and he was so deep in a fantasy that he had convinced himself it was real. Now, I wasn't physically hurt, but it was emotional scarring, and the threat he posed was 100% real to me. So to Sam, let's not meet again. I live in the valley of Sacramento, California, a few miles from the American River. This particular river is only a short walk away from a vintage part of my town, where there is absolutely nothing but chickens and a family-owned business. My first job was a family-owned coffee shop when I was 16 in this little town. To give you some backstory, now a lot of the homeless folk often flocked to the rivers and would often wander into my shop. I dealt with the odd bodies on and off almost every day without a care. However, there was one weirdo I remember vividly enough that it still makes me sit and wonder. When I was new to the shop, it took some time to get to know the regulars and remember their names. I had a lot of faces to memorize. One face in particular, for some reason, sat in my mind far above the others. A stout, bald man with a wide nose and thinly timmed glasses. He wasn't quite old, but he wasn't the youngest man I'd met. He would stand outside of my store for about 10 minutes every day before coming in to stand in the back of the cafe and watch me and my other co-workers clean and make coffee. Sometimes he wouldn't order anything, but when he did, he would always get a small black coffee and a small serving of potato salad. He would always ask for napkins and would always ask for a pen. After ordering, he would proceed to write things down on one of the napkins, leave his empty coffee cup on a table, and take his food out the door where he would stand and watch us pick up his trash. I noticed over time that he seemed to look irritated when I wasn't the one to do it. Every time he did this, he would leave small notes in poor, rough handwriting and would then throw away his salad outside. His notes were more person. At first I thought of it as nothing more than a sweet thank you. I often write small notes to serve as on receipts from time to time, things like wonderful day and thank you. But these slowly morphed. Beautiful day, take a break, I'm outside. You look lovely today, love your hair. My co-workers would make a gag out of the notes if they weren't thrown away before reading one. Once I assumed he figured out that the other girls were the ones grabbing them. He began to leave them on one end of the counter where my espresso machine was. You make me happy, Kian, one of them read. I still don't know how he learned my name or who asked, but I presume one of my co-workers on a day I was off. I began to get increasingly uncomfortable whenever he would stand outside and watch me work, or when he would order from my till. I could only smile and thank him as I got his coffee and salad, in my customer service voice. The next part is where it gets interesting. One week towards the end of the summer, he worked his routine of window shopping before ordering, asking for napkins and a pen, and going about his letter. However, he did not ask for a pen nor napkins, but proceeded to only ask for the coffee. He left to the restroom. I forgot how long he was in there, since I myself took my lunch break as soon as the order was done. When I returned, I was told that someone had left their cup in the restroom, and it had been emptied and left on top of the toilet. It was filled with semen. I don't know if it was him, but the timing was too close to not assume. I didn't see him for a while, because I had traded my early starts for closing shifts. The last time I saw him, he came in late. I presume he either found out by stalking or asking my co-workers why I was no longer a morning maid. He asked me kindly for a cup of coffee and potato salad, a pen and a napkin. I obliged, but I was hardly enthusiastic. The routine went normally. He drank his coffee, sat and wrote, left it on the counter without looking up, and walked out into the night. He didn't stop to watch. He didn't throw away his salad. You're lovely every time. Thank you for the smiles. Leave the glitter to the blondes. I don't know what this means. You're a young flower amongst the sunset. Billy. After that, I never saw him come into the store or lurk outside the window. I don't often lend out pens as much as I used to. So creepy poetry napkin guy, let's not meet. My story takes place in Florida. I was around 12 to 13 years of age. At the time I was struggling with some family issues and school bullies. So I was in and out of school, and my mother and I were discussing putting me in homeschool. My aunt suggested a way to help me make friends and keep me in school. Girl Scouts. You read that right. Send me to the group of little girls that sells cookies and makes the whole United States fat and their mouths water at the thought of them. So I agreed because I was desperate for friends. When I say that, I mean I talked to stuffed toys and made up voices for them so that I didn't feel alone. Sad, I know. But this was the truth. It is also very important because I want you all to know where my head was. I ended up going to my first troop meeting. A week after the choice had been made, I was super excited. Sadly, it wasn't what I thought it would be. The girls there, although nice, were a bit hard for me to get close to. It was a small troop of about 5 to 8 girls, and they certainly ran in different social circles than me. Their parents were also way more gung-ho about this whole scout thing than my mother expected. They wanted this to be a stepping stone, to their daughters' huge careers in college and classes. Anyway, after being part of the troupe for 2 to 4 months, it didn't go well. The girls shunned me and I grew even more lonely. I even decided to approach a girl asking her why she didn't like me. She had no problem telling me, so my mum withdrew me. Another 2 to 3 months later, another troupe showed up in our area, and my mother decided we'd give it another go. After all, not all girl troupes are like that. People are different, and she was certain someone would want to be friends with me. She was really right. I did end up making friends. Not the entire troupe was in love with me, but the troupe leader's daughter and I had become the best of friends. Of course, my mother was thrilled. I finally had a friend, and was starting to smile again. It hurts parents quite a bit to see their kids upset. Her and I did everything together. We didn't go to the same school, but it didn't matter, because we'd have sleepovers every weekend. I'd go over to her house every other day after school and do homework. She had parties, lots of them. Any time her mother thought her daughter had something to celebrate, she'd throw a big party for her, and being her daughter's best friend, I was always seated next to her. It was one of the happiest times of my life. I felt important to someone other than my family. I had a place to go outside my home, where trouble always seemed to lurk. A year turned into the second. We finished Christmas. She actually came to my birthday party and got me a gift and everything. Then things started to get weird. Because I was a year older than her, I had a bit more homework, being that I was also a grade level ahead of her. She had apparently convinced her mother to change her schools, so now she was attending mine. This was great, I was once again over the moon. The only sad thing was that we didn't have the same classes or the same lunch period. Well, that soon changed too. She showed up once for my lunch and I thought it was weird. Apparently her mother had pulled some strings and got her to lunch at my time. I didn't know the details, I just knew my best friend and I could eat together. I remember telling my mum, and she didn't let on that anything was the matter. But later when we talked about this after I'd grown up a little, she admitted the news concerned her. Then though, she just acted like it was the best news and I was happy. I started to go fishing with her and her uncle during the summer. Spent weeks over at her house with her mother and uncle. I'll admit the uncle was a bit different. I mean, he didn't set off any alarm bells, but he wasn't your usual uncle. As far as our Girl Scouts troop went, we became the leaders. We pushed our troop into camping trips and selling cookies more and more. It was great. I'd never been so highly regarded. The girls in the troop even began treating me like one of them. I was so happy to fit in. That ended up changing quite a lot, actually. Towards the end of the summer, I discovered her uncle wasn't really her uncle. More of a guy trying very hard to make her happy so that he could bang her mum. He eventually stopped coming round and her mother, I noticed, drank a lot. More than I'd seen any adult drink at the time. The end of summer meant our trip was coming to an end. The last camping trip we would get before classes started up again. I was excited to go. My mum and I bought everything we thought I would need, and my best friend and I jumped right into the van. I waved goodbye to my mum, and away my troop went. Now it's important to admit here that I had a love of horror stories. I've always loved spooky stuff and the occult, so the idea of a camping trip meant campfires and scary night stories. I was excited. Once we got to the campgrounds, I realized it wasn't going to be like camping with my family. It was a huge gathering of other troops all over. Older scouts, younger scouts, and us. Of course, the older scouts told us there were some creepy gnomes or troll-like creatures near the lake, but none of us believed them. It was a fun weekend, just not the same kind of fun I expected. I never got to tell my stories, and it was more about building teamwork and Girl Scouting stuff than I thought it would be. I know, what did I expect, right? You live and learn. Anyway, the last night I decided I would tell a ghost story. In fact, I insisted on it. So after the troop leader went to bed, my friend and I gathered all the troop in one tent, as we'd been separated into two, and the stories began. We each told a story, or a funny, embarrassing one, and then I was the last one to tell a tale. I told my story, scared the other girls, and we hurried back into our respective tents before daybreak. Then we all packed up and got our rides home. Everything was fine until the next meet-up for my troop, a week later. My mother and I showed up, and there were the adults looking very angry. Mothers, fathers, all of them. My friend's mother stepped up to my mum and pulled us aside. This is what I remember from that conversation. Listen, your daughter isn't welcome in the troop anymore. What? Why? What happened? Well, it seems that she told a story at camp, and it gave some of the other girls nightmares. The other adults requested she no longer come to troop meetings. Are you serious? It was just a story. You can't. She didn't know. She loves this group. This is where our friends are. Why didn't you tell me this early in the week when I was dropping her off at your house? The troop leader shrugged and sighed. At this point, I took off running away from my mother and friend's mother. I wanted to talk to my friend, to the other girls of the troop. I was going to apologize to them and their parents. I found my friend. She didn't seem heartbroken in any way. In fact, she was okay with it. My friend went on to say, I never liked sharing them with you anyway. They were all stuck up and snobby. They just didn't get you. I get you. We're like sisters. So now, you and I can be together more. What? But I liked the other girls and being in the troop, and what about when the troop meetings happen? So, you're asking me to quit the troop? I'll do that. I'll make my mum quit too. No more troop. No, that's not what I'm saying. Listen, we're best friends forever, remember? BFFs. Anyone who doesn't like you isn't a good person, and I don't like them. It was the sweetest and nicest thing I'd ever heard from anyone. She was so into being my friend, best friend, that she'd give up this entire group. I broke down in tears. I was happy. I was sad. It was a lot to take in. Sure enough, the troop would be disbanded after this. It would be a month, but eventually it no longer carried on. Her and I remained friends though, and I continued hanging out with her at her house. Another uncle came into the picture. That Christmas I spent at her house. Christmas night, her mother and the uncle let us, a couple of 13 to 14-year-old girls, take a full flute of champagne. I wasn't fond of it, but we felt so adult. The uncle kept making some rather inappropriate comments about my friend and I. Her mother became annoyed. They fought. He left. The next morning was hazy at best, but I remember finding my best friend in my sleeping bag with me. It didn't weird me out. We did that sometimes, crashed in each other's beds. The next week, she called me any time I wasn't with her. Our friendship became much more creepy. The calls were every hour when I wasn't with her. She said a lot of, I love yous, and you are mine, my best friend, mine. I didn't think anything of it. Our sleepovers got weirder. I was waking up and always having my friend in my sleeping bag. If she wasn't there, she'd beg me the night before to lay with her in her bed. I just thought, you know, her home life was as rough as mine, and that's what drew us together, right? Then, one day, she admitted she liked me, in a way that I like you. I was speechless, and because I felt I was way too young for a relationship or anything, that thought came with it. I bowed out. I told her I cared for her as a friend, and we could still be friends, but that I wasn't ready for that to change. She said she understood, and went a week without calling me. I thought I'd hurt her. I even thought about calling her to say I loved her too, if that's what it would take for us to be friends again. I didn't though. I was scared to. At the end of the week I got a call from her and she's acting like nothing happened. We started hanging out again, though she kept bringing up that she felt something for me. It got to the point where she was even attempting to try physically help me love her. Yeah, I ended up noping it out of that friendship. One day I just had enough and told her we couldn't be friends anymore. She seemed to handle it okay. I mean, she cried a bit, I cried a bit. I felt so heartbroken. I was in 8th grade and honestly didn't like where we were at. And since I'd be going to a new school, I thought a clean slate would help. Some things happened to my household family-wise, and I ended up being homeschooled instead. Weeks after school started, and I hadn't heard anything from her, I got a note in the mailbox. There were notes every day in my mailbox now. Love letters, angry letters, sad letters, all from my ex-best friend. Then her mother began leaving letters. Not for my mum, but for me. Both of them would leave letters in the box. The ex-friend always had them varied, but the mothers were pretty clear. I'd hurt her daughter, and she wasn't happy. That's when the phone call started. As cliché as it sounds, the phone would be answered and all we'd hear is breathing, then they'd hang up. This persisted for 6 months. After 3 months, the letters stopped and it was just the phone calls. We had so much going on family-wise that this harassment was tame, so we never dealt with it, and after 6 months, it all stopped. We didn't hear from the girl nor her mother again. They still live in the same city. My mum still saw her mum around town and stuff, but they never spoke. Fast forward 2 to 3 years and I ran into my ex-best friend again. We were at the library and I was polite and she was polite. It was pretty chill and it sounded like her life was good. After that meeting though, the calls started again, and they carried on for about a month then stopped. I never heard from the girl again. I've since moved away and everything. The only reason this memory came up is because I was on the phone with my mother the other day. She said she saw the girl. She said she looked pretty rough. I felt bad for her, but not at the same time. It's only when I got older that I realized how serious and sinister things got with that, well, toxic friendship. So to my ex-best friend and her stalker mother, let's not meet again. I was in California visiting my brother, who went to Pepperdine. So me and my family are out shopping on this really big street full of amazing stores. The first night we were on the same street for dinner, and in fact, we spent a lot of time on that little strip. There was a homeless man sitting on the side outside the restaurant, and as we were walking out, my dad gave me a $5 bill to give to the homeless man. He had white hair and a long beard. He reminded me of Gandalf. I handed him the $5 and he said thank you, and nodded, and I smiled and skipped off back to my parents. Well, then I started noticing this dude everywhere, seriously everywhere, walking around the hotel parking lot and chilling out on the sidewalk like multiple times throughout the week-long trip. On our last day in Cali, we went back in the same area where I originally encountered the man. We were on our way back to the car, but we decided to go into the souvenir store really quick. My parents walked out with me. Being the third child, this is normal, as I'm not sure if my parents are even aware I exist sometimes. My life is literally the dark sequel to Home Alone. Once I realize my family are not in the store, I walk out the door trying to catch up when Gandalf the homeless man grabs me by the shoulder and literally turns my whole body to face him. He looks me straight in the eyes and tells me how beautiful I am, passes me a piece of folded up paper, hugs me so tight, this was weird by the way, and kissed me on the neck. Obviously I knew this was whack, and once I was fully aware of the danger, I untangled myself from him and booked it down the sidewalk to catch up with my parents. As I was struggling to get away from the man, he keeps repeating, "Don't show your mum, don't show your mum," over and over. Like, dude, come on, I'm obviously gonna tell her. Anyway, I run up to my parents, and I'm like traumatized, and they don't even notice. I open up the letter he gave me and it says, "I have been watching you. It's been such a pleasure being in your company for the last week. I find your smell and look so appealing, and you're the most captivating person I've ever come across." This was only a tiny fraction of the letter. There was much more to it front and back. Unfortunately, I never got to read the whole thing because my parents finally noticed I have this weird, dirty, and crinkled up piece of paper, and the look on my face was priceless. My dad grabs it out of my hand and reads it, but not aloud. He gets about halfway down the paper, then screams, "That's disgusting," crinkles it up, and throws it aggressively in the trash. I wish I knew what it said, but it's probably best I didn't for my sake. There are so many questions like, how did this guy know my hotel? Was it because of the parking lot? I saw him once out the window wandering around the hotel, which was a good mile away from where I first saw him. How did the dude show up so many times in my week-long trip? Obviously he was stalking us on purpose. Did he know it was my last night, and that's why he felt the need to give me a letter? Is he even homeless or just a creepy stalker that likes to prowl the streets for a new child? Who knows? I guess I never will. But I hope I never see him again. And took a new position as a high school librarian. There was a little snack bar run by the cafeteria workers in the student center. Bill was the guy who manned the register for the snack bar. He was a short man in his late 50s, always had a smile for anyone who came to visit, and he really loved it when the adults of the building came by to get food or drinks, and would start a conversation with anyone who would stop to talk. He seemed sad and lonely. Over the first few months of stopping by there for my morning tea, he would always ask me questions. I was in a serious relationship at the time, and had been with my partner for 6 years, and we had a child together. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. I never got any weird vibes from him. He seemed like a sweet father/grandfather type figure. Over the summer between my first year of working and my second, my boyfriend and I broke up. I didn't talk about it at work when I could help it. It was painful to talk about because we'd been together for so long and had a child. I was trying to date online. I was on the main ones: Facebook dating, Tinder, Plenty of Fish, and Bumble. I live in a pretty small town, so the same men were on the same apps, and went on a few dates, but overall the entire process was a disaster. I only stayed on the apps for that first full semester of my second year, and then deleted them all to remain single. During this time, Bill's attention started to change. He would get very excited when I came down to get my morning drink. He knew about my breakup and would ask me how dating was going. I didn't recall telling him I was single, but I assumed that I must have let it slip at some point in conversation. I would come back in the mornings and tell him about all of my terrible dates, and I remember telling him that I was giving up on dating. He tried to hold my hand and comfort me, but I immediately jerked my hand off, and I told him I was fine with my life and that I wasn't going to date again until I was happy with just myself. Each morning that I went back, I noticed that he kept trying to find excuses to touch me. I had hair on my clothes, or that he needed to fix the alignment of my jacket, and I started to get creeped out by his attention. I stopped going down to get drinks and told him I didn't have the time in the morning anymore because the library was getting more kids needing me to check out books before school started. Since I wasn't coming down to see him, he started coming down to see me, and it started by just bringing me tea. If I wasn't at my desk, he would leave it for me to find. At first I didn't mind too much. Things just appeared, and I didn't have to fake a smile when he was near. After a few weeks, it stopped being just tea. He started to bring me food too. "We just got a shipment of oranges," he said. "I picked out the best ones for you. I know how much you like them." The gifts became bigger and bigger, until he was bringing me full meals from the cafeteria. I started trying to think how I could get this to stop while also being polite. I had to be nice, right? Over time, I couldn't even eat the food. I would just give it away or trash it the moment he left the room. The next time he came down with his arms filled with free food for me, I told him that I didn't want him to bring me anything because I was on a diet and I was bringing my own food to school. "You're perfect just the way you are," he said with a big smile, and I replied with a thank you. Why do I feel the need to be nice to creepy people? When he would come in and I wasn't at my desk, I would duck down and hide until he left. The students started to ask what was going on. I'm a grown woman, the person in charge of these students, and I'm hiding on the floor behind a stack of books to avoid talking to him. The students even said that they don't like him, and they had nicknamed him the Troll. It was such a fitting name. Over time, he understood that I didn't want any more food from him. I had a month of glorious silence with no visits, just awkward waves in the hallway if I passed, and my second year as a librarian ended. When the third year started back up, I had a lovely summer without any thoughts of him. I walked into the library on my first day with a present on my desk. I opened the package, and it was a coffee tumbler with a gift card to Starbucks. No name or card to say who gave it to me. I wasn't sure if it was him, so I went down to ask, and he said he wanted to buy me something special and to have my school year start with a smile. I accepted the gift and thanked him. I'm not saying no to some free drinks, but I shouldn't have taken it, and I know that now. At least once a week he would bring me something, and each gift got more expensive and I became increasingly more uncomfortable. By October I told him to stop, not to bring me anything. Do not buy me anything, it makes me uncomfortable, and I will not be buying anything for you in return. But he didn't listen. He kept bringing me things I knew he couldn't afford on this cafeteria worker's salary, and told him to just stop. I started to get angry. I was no longer smiling or saying thank you, and I realized my biggest mistake now. I took the gifts. I took them because I don't have a lot of money, and the gifts were truly all things I needed or loved, and really, I should have never accepted them. I started to confide in other workers of how uncomfortable the whole situation made me. Most of them would just reply, "He's single and really nice and obviously likes you. I know he's older, but you should just give him a chance." I did not. With each unwanted gift, he would say, "I know you told me no more gifts, but I had to get this for you." On Valentine's Day of my 3rd year working at this school, a giant gift basket was on my desk. I brought the entire thing back to him. I told him to take it back and that it was just too much. I guessed that it was about $150 for the entire thing. I told him to keep it. He said that if I took this, it would be the last gift, and he promised. I took it and made him repeat it again, that it was the final gift. I didn't get a chance to test this. By the next month, the entire country shut down for COVID, and I had to still be on campus to work despite all the students being remote. In April, he came to my desk with a goodbye gift. He was quitting his job because they could not pay any of the cafeteria workers without students on campus, and was moving away. I cried with him, partly because I'm empathetic when others cry, and mostly from relief. He was leaving, and I never had to speak to him again. The next day I had a friend request and a message from him on Facebook. I didn't respond or accept, but it did fill in some gaps from my knowledge. He had a car as his profile picture, and I remember the picture from all my online dating apps. That's why his demeanor changed. He saw me on all the dating apps and I had ignored him. For 8 months I thought it was over, and I didn't think about him. School started back up this past August with students back on campus. It was a relief not to worry about seeing him or finding random things on my desk, but in October my work phone started ringing. I was so busy I didn't answer, and the person called 5 times, and when I finally answered, thinking it was a very urgent parent, it was the creepy troll Bill. He had to talk to me. He was in love with me, and he spent every day thinking about me, and oh, by the way, he is married with grandchildren. Guess who's ready to leave his wife for me? Crazy troll Bill. He kept me on my work phone for 45 minutes and I listened. I was nice. In hindsight, I have no idea why I kept talking to him. I told him I wasn't interested in him in that way. He begged to be friends and I said fine. He asked me to accept his friend request and I did, and he tried messaging me the next day but I left it on read. 2 weeks later I get a message from the front office that a representative from the company needs to talk to me. I rarely get sales reps coming in person, especially after COVID, so I go up front and it's the troll in a suit, with large bags under his arms. The secretary thought he must have been a regular because she recognized him but couldn't place him where. He asks to come in and to talk to me, but with COVID and safety rules no one was allowed in. I go outside in the cold and speak to him. He explained he just wanted to drop off a few gifts for me, and proceeds to take out each item from the bag and tells me where he was and how it reminded him of me and why I had to have it. He brought things for my kid, nowhere close to what he needs for his age, and I'm panicking, my stomach hurts, and I feel like I'm trapped, but outwardly I'm polite and nice. He asks to hold my hand while he reads the poem he wrote for me, but I refuse and move as far away as I can manage. The poem he reads references a picture of me. He has the picture printed out, and he said it's his favorite. And I'm 14 years old in the picture. How far back did he go on my Facebook? And this man used to work in a high school? I tell him again I don't want to have anything to do with him, and he says that that's okay, that he just needs to be near me, and that he'll take any attention that I was willing to give him, and he just needed to be in my life. He goes in for a hug, but I try to get away, and I'm trapped between a tree and a bench. With his height, his face is buried in my breast, and his hand tries to sneak under my shirt, and I can hear him try to smell my hair, and I'm instantly sick. I sent him a Facebook message the moment I'm back in school. This time, finally, I am not nice, and tell him, no more gifts, period, none. This is a matter of consent, and I do not consent any more gifts. You say you care about me, but you do not respect my wishes. No more gifts. and after he responded and I was confident that he actually understood my words, I blocked him and changed the setting on my profile to make it harder to find. In November, a box arrived at the school, a subscription box that will be sent every month. There isn't a name who it's from, but I know who sent it. So I went to speak with the police on campus, but guess what? Not much they can do since I don't have proof that it's from Bill. I've called the company, but they cannot tell me who the account holder is, and the school is aware of the situation. They will hopefully remember him if he ever tries to come back. The day before my birthday, he called my work phone 4 times. On my birthday, he called 5 more times, and I didn't answer. Yesterday, the second package arrived at the school with my name on it and the school address. I really hope this saga's over, but it might not be. I make sure I'm not followed when I leave work, but I do not have any clue what kind of car he drives. I have a special way I drive home now, where everything is single lanes, hopefully making it easier if I'm followed. I always check the caller ID before I answer my work phone, and I'm afraid of anyone who expresses an interest in me now because crushes are not cute anymore. I wait for more things to be delivered on campus, and I live in a constant state of panic because what if he meant it? What if he has to be a part of my life, whether I like it or not? So to Bill, the creepy troll, let's never meet again. This happened around 1995. I'm pretty confident I saw a shadow person. At the time, my late wife and I were living in a double-wide mobile home that we had purchased, new, that was sitting on a spot that had never had any house of any kind, and is at least 1,000 feet from where any house is or has ever been to the best of my knowledge. In light of this, you would not think that our house would be a likely location for a haunting. However, my wife and I have on occasion seen several rather strange occurrences there, the most, starting of which, I will relate here. This event took place one night after my wife and I had retired for the evening. Normally at night, my wife and I would leave on a light all night in the bathroom furthest from our bedroom, because there are usually children in the house. That bathroom is just outside the children's bedrooms and would provide them with a nightlight. However, on that night, all the children were staying elsewhere, and there was no one in the house except my wife and I. As was usual though, we had left the light on in the bathroom out of habit, and it cast a glow through our open bedroom door, weakly lighting the room. Some time had passed after we had laid down, and I was unable to sleep. I assumed, though, that my wife was asleep, because her breathing had become regular, and reached a point at which it sounded like she was asleep. While laying there, unable to sleep, I began to become aware of a presence that I could not explain, other than to say I knew we were not alone. I was laying there, trying to convince myself that it was only my imagination, when suddenly and silently a figure moved in through our bedroom door and proceeded parallel to our bed in a smooth, gliding motion. Then, rounding the corner of our bed, and took up a fixed position at the foot of it. Strangely, I seemed to be acutely aware that this entity was conscious of us and was intently watching us while I was laying there watching it. The entity can best be described as something that had the appearance of black smoke or a shadow. However, it was more material than either of these, but less material than a real person. The strangest thing about this whole situation was my complete lack of fear. Although I was acutely aware that some being had entered our room, and there was no doubt in my mind that it was absolutely not of this earth, at least not as we perceived it, it did not seem to arouse any fear response in me. I would say it aroused a feeling that would fit somewhere between creepy and curiosity, especially considering the fact that I was sure it was as aware of me as I was of it. After some time, I had almost convinced myself that I was imagining it, due to my drowsy condition and the dim light. Suddenly I realized that my wife was no longer breathing like she was asleep. Her breathing had become almost silent. Speaking in a calm voice, I said, "Honey, you awake?" She replied, "Yes." So I added, "Do you, see anything?" I was expecting her reply to be something along the lines of, "What do you mean?" But instead, and much to my surprise, she said, "You mean that thing standing at the foot of the bed?" When she said this, I did finally become somewhat nervous, and we both then began to pray. We lay there for about 10 minutes, softly saying prayers, and then it was gone. But it didn't just disappear. Over a period of about 20 seconds, it became less solid, like smoke clearing, and our perception of its presence became weaker and weaker, until it just wasn't there anymore, almost as if it never had been. Nothing like this has ever happened since, and the only evidence that it did happen at all are my memories of it. I turned 21 this recent October. As part of my celebration, I took some friends to this bar that sits on top of a 30-story hotel. This bar was in the city about 30 minutes out from the small rural town that I live in, but because of COVID regulations, one party at the time was allowed in the elevator. One party at a time was allowed in the elevator, and each party was allowed in the bar as another party left, so we were waiting for a while. They had a designated area for the line that had social distancing stickers placed on the ground and rope dividers that guided the line in a snake pattern. My friends and I were chilling, most of us just on our phones trying to pass the time, and I look up from my phone to engage my surroundings when I see a man standing across the lift from us, his phone up to his waist, to seem low-key, and take a picture of us. The photo definitely caught me staring right at the camera. The reason I know for a fact he took a picture is because his sound was still on. I immediately looked to my girlfriend to see if she saw what I saw, but she was on her phone. I then look over to my other side to see my friend Oliver death glaring the guy who took our picture. For visuals, this guy was probably in his mid to late 30s, around 5'8", and built like a thumb, short and stout. He had a mask so I couldn't see his face, but the mask had rhinestones on it. It was clearly trying to spell something out, but I couldn't read it. Oliver then looked over at me, and I gave him a look saying that I saw the same thing. We then texted in the group chat and went down, and everyone looked over at the guy. I think we were all waiting for one of us to speak up and say something about it, but no one did. One of the guys in our group, a 6'3", 250-pound football player, not someone to mess with, later said he saw the guy take a photo and he was tempted to say something but didn't want to cause a scene and potentially get us kicked. Very thoughtful of him, but I would also like to have seen an arse-whipping go down personally. The guy then got a call on his phone and walked away. Even when we were in the bar, I would occasionally look around to see if the guy made it up, but I never saw him after that. No one made a big deal about it, other than Oliver and I. I know my friends didn't see, but come on. How can you not ask a million questions right now? Is this man a perv, part of a human trafficking ring, or just scoping us out? FBI? Why would anyone want to be watching a bunch of college students? The point I'm making is that there are plenty of unanswered questions. Well, anyway, the next day I made plans with my girlfriend and Oliver to hang out. We were hungover from the night before, so I decided to head to McDonald's, whose hash browns have saved my life numerous times. We were in the drive-thru when a car pulls up behind us. Oliver looks in the rearview mirror and starts freaking. He says he didn't want to alarm anyone, but it was the man from yesterday. I look back, and it's him. I didn't see his face because of the mask the first time, and believe it or not, there are a lot of short, bald men that roam around these cornfields. I didn't want to believe it, so I said, yeah, it probably could be. Maybe not, though. I mean, what are the odds that we see the same man we saw yesterday in the city, in the middle of nowhere? Well, the odds were low but not improbable. The man pulled his car from the drive-thru, parked, got out the car, and put on a mask with rhinestones on it and walked into the McDonald's. As he was walking over, he clearly tried to look into the car, at us, and even walked too close for comfort, but Oliver had tinted windows. I mean, you can still see him, but you've got to focus really hard. So I felt better, but still a part of me wants to say it wasn't the same guy. But the other part knows it was. About a week after the McDonald's incident, Oliver needed a ride to his buddy's house to pick up a TV he bought from him. Oliver's car had broken down, and he was driving on a flat tire for months, and he had no bumper at the time. So I offered to give him a ride because he's my best bud, and it's how I got into this situation. I park on the street across from the house. Oliver gets out and goes in while I stay in the car. Oliver is a talker, so I know it's going to be more than just a few minutes, and after 10 minutes go by, I'm getting a little bit annoyed. So I look up at the house to see if he would just miraculously walk out, but instead I saw someone else. I saw the thumb-shaped man walking down the street with a little rat dog. No mask on this time, but his body shape was super similar to the last two experiences. He then hops off the sidewalk and starts walking diagonally towards this car with his rat dog. I start to get scared as it's 10 PM at night. Oliver works till late. I know 10 PM is not ideal time to pick up a TV, but there's no one else around other than the moths that are flying around the dimly lit street. So as this guy is approaching us, Oliver comes out of the house and starts walking over. The man switches his course and walks past Oliver and said something to him. I see him laugh and wave and then look through the car window as if to say, let's get the hell out of here. I start the car, and as we're leaving I ask Oliver what the man said. Oliver said the man said hi to him at first, when he first passed, but then a few seconds later, as Oliver was a good distance away, he turned around and said, nice weather we're having, to which he goes, yeah, it is. We both discussed how odd that was, and how the man strongly resembled the guy who took our picture in the city. Nothing has happened since, but occasionally I will get the feeling that someone is following me in a store, or someone is watching me when I leave my friend's place late at night. Best case scenario is they're all separate events, with different men who look like each other, but I still cannot deny that taking pictures of strangers, looking into people's cars, when there are clearly people in there, and saying nice weather when it's 40 degrees out and late at night to a complete stranger, are all quite bizarre. I'm not sure what to make of it. Hopefully someone can give me some insight into what we're dealing with, because I'm feeling a little paranoid. A little backstory in order for all of this to make a bit more sense. I used to live in New York City in a tiny apartment full of 6 other people and me, so 7 in total. We dubbed ourselves the team. I was the youngest at 19 and was treated like all little sisters, as everyone else was 26 to 35. I'm also pretty tiny, standing at 5'2", and not even 115 pounds soaking wet. This particular instance involved my giant 6'5" weightlifter roommate from Africa that I called Moo. During the summer, I worked at a little hole-in-the-wall coffee shop on the Upper East Side. Contrary to popular belief, the highest crime rate was the Upper East Side. I would close on a few nights out the week with another worker that absolutely hated my guts called Fatima. I only agreed to close on the night she worked the late shift because I got to bring home the bagels that wouldn't sell and would give these out, otherwise they'd be thrown away. On my walk home, which was about a 30-minute walk, I would give a bag of bagels to a nice homeless man. I called him Bagel Guy, and he called me Coffee Girl. And now is where the story begins. Earlier in the day that I closed with my coworker Fatima, a man had come in and ordered coffee, which isn't unusual in itself because I worked in a coffee shop. What made him stand out was that I had never seen him before, and neither had my coworkers. The coffee shop was one of those places with regulars that would have their orders being made the second they stepped into the door, and everyone knew them by name or at least recognized them. I brushed it off as maybe he was exploring or had recently moved into the area, but as the line steadily shrunk, I was noticing that he was staring bullets at me. At first, I wasn't too worried. After all, I lived in New York City, and there was an overtly fair amount of awkward and unusual characters. Only this guy was blatantly staring bullets at me, to the point where I could feel his eyes on me when I turned around to grab people's orders. When it was his turn to order, I mentioned that I hadn't seen him in the shop before, and he replied that he had stopped in because he saw me at the window. Okay. Again, it's New York City, people do weird stuff. He ordered, he paid, but he kept hanging around the counter trying to get my attention and to speak to me. I politely told him that I was busy and that he'd need to grab a seat or clear out because I needed to work. Mind you, this place was literally like a closet. The only people that would ever sit at the 2.5 tables we had were the guy that cleaned and ran our pickups, or one of the 3 people that had been coming to the shop since the dawn of time itself. This strange guy hung around nearly all day, sometimes outside or at the table when a seat was available, but he was never out of sight for more than 30 to 45 minutes. I was starting to get weirded out at this point that I voluntarily talked to Fatima, even though she despised me. So much so to the point she'd yell at me in front of customers and complain loudly to the managers about me. I told her the weird guy had been bugging me all day, and didn't listen when I told him that I couldn't just loiter. Fatima didn't care. When closing time came around, we would usually be done around 11:30 to midnight. I was tasked with going to grab our little sign and bench that we had outside. So I go out, and guess who's there? That's right, the weirdo. I tell him that we are closing, and that I needed to bring the bench inside. He gets off the bench and walks off. I watch him turn the corner at the end of the street, but I'm still weirded out. I mention it to Fatima and ask her if she'd stay with me because I wanted my roommate Moo to come and get me. But she doesn't care. I grab my bags of leftover bagels, and she locks up and gets out of there towards one of the subway stations uptown. My apartment was downtown, so I couldn't have walked with her anyway. As I'm walking, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed, and decided to turn quickly and without warning to see if I am. Turns out I was. Every time I'd turn around, this guy would quickly try to hide in a doorway like the stereotypical creeper in a movie, doubling back, switching avenues, and trying to lose him by hiding in groups of people didn't help. I know many people are gonna think, why didn't I call someone? You see, my hands were full, and I was trying not to trip or panic. Remember Bagel Guy? This is where he makes an appearance. I'd always be bringing him bagels and we'd have a chat. I finally reach where Bagel Guy usually is and say hi and hand him his share of bagels. I tell him that I'm being followed and tell him that he's hiding badly in a doorway. Bagel Guy sees the creep and tells me to stay where I am and to call someone. Moo was the only person I could reach. I had acted like my phone rang and was kind of talking in shorthand to him about the creep and that I was with Bagel Guy. Moo was still a ways downtown, but said that he was hurrying, and I asked Bagel Guy if he'd walk with me to meet my roommate because I was scared out of my mind, and he agreed and said it was no problem. We start our walk downtown towards my roommate, and the whole time the creeper is still following. He's even doing the whole horribly fail at trying to hide shtick, but he's getting closer and closer every time we turn to look. But there's still no sign of Moo and I want to cry. Finally, we see a beast of a man just barreling towards us and I immediately recognize it as Moo. I guess he had seen the guy following me and now Bagel Guy, because Moo doesn't stop as he reaches us, he just kept on running. Bagel Guy and I decide to jog towards where Moo was heading, and I was glad I did. When Moo reached the creep, he shoved past him against the wall where he was hiding and confronted him about following his little sister. I guess I should note that I looked nothing like Moo. The creepy guy is now the one scared out of his mind. He has this 6'5" ripped guy that's nearly breathing fire at him. Moo threatened the guy that if he catches him following us again after this, or following me, or coming to the coffee shop, but the creep is going to regret it severely. I was a little taken aback. Moo is a giant teddy bear, but he's not someone you want to be on the bad side of. After Moo was done scaring the guy, he thanked Bagel Guy many times for watching out for me and hoped he enjoyed his bagels. Then Moo and I got home. Unfortunately, I was never bothered by that creep again. When I was in high school, probably around 9th or 10th grade, my best friend had a boyfriend that was older and lived fairly far away, so he was not from our school or anything. Not sure how they met. When we would spend the night at my house, or we would go to the mall or to see a movie, he would often stalk us. We would be in my house, and he would drive by slowly. Keep in mind he lived nowhere near there, so it was no accident. This was while they were dating. I think he wanted to check up to make sure she wasn't cheating or something. He would look to see if my car was at my house, etc. One time we were at an amusement park that was local, and he just happened to show up there. My friend, bless her heart, was kind of dumb and naive, so she honestly thought it was some happy accident he showed up there while we were there. Obviously, I knew this was intentional. It was pretty annoying that she and I could do nothing without him showing up or following us. I used to talk to him, and he told me he wanted to poke holes in their contraception so that he could get her pregnant so she wouldn't leave him. I told her what he said, and she still carried on sleeping with him. Finally, she got some sense and decided she wanted to break up. Well, that did not go well. She had a grandmother and was elderly, in the early stages of dementia at the time. Lived alone, but only a few minutes from my friend so they could keep an eye on her and take care of her. Well, apparently, the crazy boyfriend began visiting the elderly grandmother regularly on his own. No one knew he was doing this, since she was just a confused old woman. He was saying all kinds of things to her to try and manipulate her. It worked to the point that the grandmother thought he was a great guy, and that my friend and her mum and stepdad were awful for treating him badly. The grandmother had some kind of episode where she was yelling at my friend's parents about everything. It got to the point where they had to take out a restraining order, so that the guy could no longer approach her or the grandmother. I'm not a scaredy cat, but I was getting a little nervous myself because he did know where I lived, and he knew I was probably one of the ones encouraging her to break up with him, and I worried he may retaliate. But lucky for everyone involved, he took the hint and stayed away. But that is truly a shady tactic to manipulate an innocent old woman with dementia into turning her own daughter and granddaughter and confusing the poor old woman. What a piece of work. I am from Eastern Europe. I'm going to share with you a story that my grandparents and mother used to talk about. My great-grandfather went to the forest to pick some wood. He went there during the night, since it was illegal to take wood from the forest. By chance, he met another man from the village who was doing the same thing. They agreed to stick together. A little time passed when they saw a small billy goat. Its fur was black. My great-grandfather assumed that someone had lost it. So they decided to take the billy goat with them in order to share its meal later. They put the billy goat in a sack, and then weird stuff began to happen. The sack became heavier and heavier, and they often exchanged it between them. At some point, the billy goat was so agitated that my great-grandfather said, "Take it easy, billy goat." The paranormal thing is that the billy goat repeated the exact same words in a weird voice. My great-grandfather had a gun and shot the sack twice. There was nothing but thin air. They were convinced it was the devil, since they had in mind to steal wood.